the same moment her nurse came into the room, sobbing. When she saw her sitting there, she started back with a loud cry of amazement and joy. Then running to her, she caught her in her arms and covered her with kisses. "My precious darling princess, where have you been? What has happened to you? We've all been crying our eyes out and searching the house from top to bottom for you." Not quite from the top, thought Irene to herself, and she might have added, not quite to the bottom perhaps if she had known all, but the one she would not and the other she could not say. "Oh, Ludi, I've had such a dreadful adventure," she replied, and told her all about the cat with the long legs and how she ran out upon the mountain and came back again. But she said nothing of her grandmother or her lamp. "And there we've been searching for you all over the house for more than an hour and a half," exclaimed the nurse. "But that's no matter now we've got you. Only, princess, I must say," she added, her mood changing, "what you ought to have done was to call for your own Ludi to come and help you instead of running out of the house, and up the mountain in that wild, I must say, foolish fashion." "Well, Ludi," said Irene quietly, "perhaps if you had a big cat, all legs, running at you, you might not exactly know what was the wisest thing to do at the moment." "I wouldn't run up the mountain anyhow," returned Ludi. "Not if you had time to think about it. But when those creatures came at you that night on the mountain, you were so frightened yourself that you lost your way home." This put a stop to Ludi's reproaches. She had been on the point of saying that the long-legged cat must have been a twilight fancy of the princess's, but the memory of the horrors of that night, and of the talking, to which the king had given her in consequence, prevented her from saying what after all she did not half believe, having a strong suspicion that the cat was a goblin, for she knew nothing of the difference between the goblins and their creatures. She counted them all just goblins. Without another word she went and got some fresh tea and bread and butter for the princess. Before she returned, the whole household, headed by the housekeeper, burst into the nursery to exult over their darling. The gentle men-at-arms followed, and were ready enough to believe all she told them about the long-legged cat. Indeed, though wise enough to say nothing about it, they remembered with no little horror just such a creature amongst those they had surprised at their gambols upon the princess's lawn. In their own hearts they blamed themselves for not having kept better watch, and their captain gave orders that from this night the front door and all the windows on the ground floor should be locked immediately the sun set, and opened after upon no pretense whatever. The men-at-arms redoubled their vigilance, and for some time there was no further cause of alarm. When the princess woke the next morning, her nurse was bending over her. "How your ring does glow this morning, princess, just like a fiery rose," she said. "Does it, Ludi?" returned Irene. "Who gave me the ring, Ludi? I know I've had it a long time, but where did I get it? I don't remember." "I think it must have been your mother gave it you, princess. But really, for as long as you have worn it, I don't remember that ever I heard," answered her nurse. "I will ask my King Papa the next time he comes," said Irene. Chapter 17. Springtime. The spring so dear to all creatures, young and old, came at last, and before the first few days of it had gone, the king rode through its budding valleys to see his little daughter. He had been in a distant part of his dominions all the winter, for he was not in the habit of stopping in one great city, or of visiting only his favorite country houses, but he moved from place to place, that all his people might know him. Wherever he journeyed, he kept a constant lookout for the ablest and best men to put into office, and wherever he found himself mistaken, and those he had appointed incapable or unjust, he removed them at once. Hence you see it was his care of the people that kept him from seeing his princess so often as he would have liked. You may wonder why he did not take her about with him, but there were several reasons against his doing so, and I suspect her great-great-grandmother had had a principal hand in preventing it. Once more Irene heard the bugle blast, and once more she was at the gate to meet her father as he rode up on his great white horse. After they had been alone for a little while, she thought of what she had resolved to ask him. "Please, King Papa," she said, "will you tell me where I got this pretty ring? I can't remember." The king looked at it. A strange, beautiful smile spread like sunshine over his face, and an answering smile, but at the same time a questioning one, spread like moonlight over Irene's. "It was your quest. And Mama's once," he said. "And why isn't it hers now?" asked Irene. "She does not want it now," said the king, looking grave. "Why doesn't she want it now?" "Because she's gone where all those rings are made." "And when shall I see her?" asked the princess. "Not for some time yet," answered the king, and the tears came into his eyes. Irene did not remember her mother and did not know why her father looked so, and why the tears came in his eyes. But she put her arms round his neck and kissed him, and asked no more questions. The king was much disturbed on hearing the report of the gentlemen at arms concerning the creatures they had seen, and I presume would have taken Irene with him that very day, but for what the presence of the ring on her finger assured him of. About an hour before he left, Irene saw him go up the old stair, and he did not come down again till they were just ready to start, and she thought with herself that he had been up to see the old lady. When he went away, he left other 6 gentlemen behind him, that there might be 6 of them always on guard. And now, in the lovely spring weather, Irene was out on the mountain the greater part of the day. In the warmer hollows there were lovely primroses, and not so many that she ever got tired of them. As often as she saw a new one opening an eye of light in the blind earth, she would clap her hands with gladness, and unlike some children I know, instead of pulling it, would touch it as tenderly as if it had been a new baby, and having made its acquaintance, would leave it as happy as she found it. She treated the plants on which they grew like birds' nests. Every fresh flower was like a new little bird to her. She would pay visits to all the flower nests she knew, remembering each by itself. She would go down on her hands and knees beside one and say, "Good morning. Are you all smelling very sweet this morning? Goodbye." And then she would go to another nest and say the same. It was a favorite amusement with her. There were many flowers up and down, and she loved them all, but the primroses were her favorites. "They're not too shy, and they're not a bit forward," she would say to Ludi. There were goats too about, over the mountain, and when the little kids came she was as pleased with them as with the flowers. The goats belonged to the miners mostly, a few of them to Curdy's mother, but there were a good many wild ones that seemed to belong to nobody. These the goblins counted theirs, and it was upon them partly that they lived. They set snares and dug pits for them, and did not scruple to take what tame ones happened to be caught, but they did not try to steal them in any other manner, because they were afraid of the dogs the hill people kept to watch them, for the knowing dogs always tried to bite their feet. But the goblins had a kind of sheep of their own, very queer creatures, which they drove out to feed at night, and the other goblin creatures were wise enough to keep good watch over them, for they knew they should have their bones by and by. Chapter 18. Curdy's Clue. Curdy was as watchful as ever, but was almost getting tired of his ill success. Every other night or so he followed the goblins about, as they went on digging and boring, and getting as near them as he could, watched them from behind stones and rocks, but as yet he seemed no nearer finding out what they had in view. As at first, he always kept hold of the end of his string, while his pickaxe, left just outside the hole by which he entered the goblin's country from the mine, continued to serve as an anchor and hold fast the other end. The goblins, hearing no more noise in that quarter, had ceased to apprehend an immediate invasion, and kept no watch. One night, after dodging about and listening till he was nearly falling asleep with weariness, he began to roll up his ball, for he had resolved to go home to bed. It was not long, however, before he began to feel bewildered. One after another he passed goblin houses, caves, that is, occupied by goblin families, and at length was sure they were many more than he had passed as he came. He had to use great caution to pass unseen. They lay so close together. Could his string have led him wrong? He still followed, winding it, and still it led him into more thickly populated quarters until he became quite uneasy and indeed apprehensive. For although he was not afraid of the cobs, he was afraid of not finding his way out. But what could he do? It was of no use to sit down and wait for the morning. The morning made no difference here. It was dark, and always dark, and if his string failed him, he was helpless. He might even arrive within a yard of the mine and never know it. Seeing he could do nothing better, he would at least find where the end of his string was, and if possible, how it had come to play him such a trick. He knew by the size of the ball that he was getting pretty near the last of it, when he began to feel a tugging and pulling at it. What could it mean? Turning a sharp corner, he thought he heard strange sounds. These grew as he went on to a scuffling and growling and squeaking, and the noise increased until, turning a second sharp corner, he found himself in the midst of it, and the same moment tumbled over a wallowing mass, which he knew must be a knot of the cob's creatures. Before he could recover his feet, he had caught some great scratches on his face and several severe bites on his legs and arms. But as he scrambled to get up, his hand fell upon his pickaxe, and before the horrid beasts could do him any serious harm, he was laying about with it right and left in the dark. The hideous cries which followed gave him the satisfaction of knowing that he had punished some of them pretty smartly for their rudeness, and by their scampering and their retreating howls, he perceived that he had routed them. He stood for a little, weighing his battle-axe in his hand as if it had been the most precious lump of metal. But indeed no lump of gold itself could have been so precious at the time as that common tool, then untied the end of the string from it, put the ball in his pocket, and still stood thinking. It was clear that the cob's creatures had found his axe, had between them carried it off, and had so led him he knew not where. But for all his thinking he could not tell what he ought to do, until suddenly he became aware of a glimmer of light in the distance. Without a moment's hesitation he set out for it, as fast as the unknown and rugged way would permit. Yet again turning a corner, led by the dim light, he spied something quite new in his experience of the underground regions, a small, irregular shape of something shining. Going up to it, he found it was a piece of mica or Muscovy glass, called sheep silver in Scotland, and the light flickered as if from a fire behind it. After trying in vain for some time to discover an entrance to the place where it was burning, he came at length to a small chamber in which an opening, high in the wall, revealed a glow beyond. To this opening he managed to scramble up, and then he saw a strange sight. Below sat a little group of goblins around a fire, the smoke of which vanished in the darkness far aloft. The sides of the cave were full of shining minerals like those of the palace hall, and the company was evidently of a superior order, for everyone wore stones about head, or arms, or waist, shining dull, gorgeous colors in the light of the fire. Nor had Curdie looked long before he recognized the king himself, and found that he had made his way into the inner apartment of the royal family. He had never had such a good chance of hearing something. He crept through the hole as softly as he could, scrambled a good way down the wall towards them without attracting attention, and then sat down and listened. The king, evidently the queen, and probably the crown prince and the prime minister were talking together. He was sure of the queen by her shoes, for as she warmed her feet at the fire, he saw them quite plainly. "That will be fun," said the one he took for the crown prince. It was the first whole sentence he heard. "I don't see why you should think it such a grand affair," said his stepmother, tossing her head backward. "You must remember my spouse," interposed his majesty, as if making excuse for his son. "He has got the same blood in him. His mother—" "Don't talk to me of his mother. You positively encourage his unnatural fancies. Whatever belongs to that mother ought to be cut out of him." "You forget yourself, my dear," said the king. "I don't," said the queen, "nor you either. If you expect me to approve of such coarse tastes, you will find yourself mistaken. I don't wear shoes for nothing." "You must acknowledge, however," the king said, with a little groan, "that this at least is no whim of Harelip's, but a matter of state policy. You are well aware that his gratification comes purely from the pleasure of sacrificing himself to the public good. Does it not, Harelip?" "Yes, father, of course it does. Only it will be nice to make her cry. I'll have the skin taken off between her toes and tie them up till they grow together. Then her feet will be like other people's, and there will be no occasion for her to wear shoes." "Do you mean to insinuate I've got toes, you unnatural wretch?" cried the queen, and she moved angrily towards Harelip. The counselor, however, who was betwixt them, leaned forward so as to prevent her touching him, but only as if to address the prince. "Your Royal Highness," he said, "possibly requires to be reminded that you have got 3 toes yourself, 1 on one foot, 2 on the other." "Ha ha ha," shouted the queen triumphantly. The counselor, encouraged by this mark of favor, went on. "It seems to me, Your Royal Highness, it would greatly endear you to your future people, proving to them that you are not the less one of themselves that you had the misfortune to be born of a son-mother, if you were to command upon yourself the comparatively slight operation which, in a more extended form, you so wisely meditate with regard to your future princess." "Ha ha ha," laughed the queen louder than before, and the king and the minister joined in the laugh. Harelip growled, and for a few moments the others continued to express their enjoyment of his discomfiture. The queen was the only one Curdie could see with any distinctness. She sat sideways to him, and the light of the fire shone full upon her face. He could not consider her handsome. Her nose was certainly broader at the end than its extreme length, and her eyes, instead of being horizontal, were set up like 2 perpendicular eggs, one on the broad, the other on the small end. Her mouth was no bigger than a small buttonhole until she laughed, when it stretched from ear to ear. Only, to be sure, her ears were very nearly in the middle of her cheeks. Anxious to hear everything they might say, Curdie ventured to slide down a smooth part of the rock just under him, to a projection below, upon which he thought to rest. But whether he was not careful enough, or the projection gave way, down he came with a rush on the floor of the cavern, bringing with him a great rumbling shower of stones. The goblins jumped from their seats in more anger than consternation, for they had never yet seen anything to be afraid of in the palace. But when they saw Curdie with his pick in his hand, their rage was mingled with fear, for they took him for the first of an invasion of minors. The king, notwithstanding, drew himself up to his full height of 4 feet, spread himself to his full breadth of 3.5, for he was the handsomest and squarest of all the goblins, and strutting up to Curdie, planted himself with outspread feet before him, and said with dignity, "Pray, what right have you in my palace?" "The right of necessity, your majesty," answered Curdie. "I lost my way and did not know where I was wandering to." "How did you get in?" "By a hole in the mountain." "But you are a miner. Look at your pickaxe." Curdie did look at it, answering, "I came upon it lying on the ground a little way from here. I tumbled over some wild beasts who were playing with it. Look, your majesty." And Curdie showed him how he was scratched and bitten. The king was pleased to find him behave more politely than he had expected from what his people had told him concerning the miners, for he attributed it to the power of his own presence, but he did not therefore feel friendly to the intruder. "You will oblige me by walking out of my dominions at once," he said, well knowing what a mockery lay in the words. "With pleasure, if your majesty will give me a guide," said Curdie. "I will give you 1,000, said the king with a scoffing air of magnificent liberality. "One will be quite sufficient," said Curdie. But the king uttered a strange shout, half halloo, half roar, and in rushed goblins till the cave was swarming. He said something to the first of them which Curdie could not hear, and it was passed from one to another till in a moment the farthest in the crowd had evidently heard and understood it. They began to gather about him in a way he did not relish, and he retreated towards the wall. They pressed upon him. "Stand back," said Curdie, grasping his pickaxe tighter by his knee. They only grinned and pressed closer. Curdie bethought himself and began to rhyme. 10, 20, 30. You're all so very dirty. 20, 30, 40. You're all so thick and snorty. 30, 40, 50. You're all so puff and snifty. 40, 50, 60. Beast and man so mixty. 50, 60, 70. Mixty, maxty, leventy. 60, 70, 80. All your cheeks so slaty. 70, 80, 90. All your hands so flinty. 80, 90, 100. Altogether dundred. The goblins fell back a little when he began, and made horrible grimaces all through the rhyme, as if eating something so disagreeable that it set their teeth on edge and gave them the creeps. But whether it was that the rhyming words were most of them no words at all, for, a new rhyme being considered the more efficacious, Curdie had made it on the spur of the moment, or whether it was that the presence of the king and queen gave them courage, I cannot tell. But the moment the rhyme was over they crowded on him again, and outshot 100 long arms, with a multitude of thick nailless fingers at the ends of them, to lay hold upon him. Then Curdie heaved up his axe, but being as gentle as courageous and not wishing to kill any of them, he turned the end which was square and blunt like a hammer, and with that came down a great blow on the head of the goblin nearest him. Hard as the heads of all goblins are, he thought he must feel that. And so he did, no doubt, but he only gave a horrible cry and sprung at Curdie's throat. Curdie, however, drew back in time, and just at that critical moment, remembered the vulnerable part of the goblin body. He made a sudden rush at the king and stamped with all his might on his majesty's feet. The king gave a most unkingly howl and almost fell into the fire. Curdie then rushed into the crowd, stamping right and left. The goblins drew back, howling on every side as he approached, but they were so crowded that few of those he attacked could escape his tread, and the shrieking and roaring that filled the cave would have appalled Curdie but for the good hope it gave him. They were tumbling over each other in heaps in their eagerness to rush from the cave, when a new assailant suddenly faced him. The queen, with flaming eyes and expanded nostrils, her hair standing half up from her head, rushed at him. She trusted in her shoes. They were of granite, hollowed like French sabots. Curdie would have endured much rather than hurt a woman, even if she was a goblin, but here was an affair of life and death. Forgetting her shoes, he made a great stamp on one of her feet. But she instantly returned it with very different effect, causing him frightful pain, and almost disabling him. His only chance with her would have been to attack the granite shoes with his pickaxe, but before he could think of that she had caught him up in her arms and was rushing with him across the cave. She dashed him into a hole in the wall with a force that almost stunned him. But although he could not move, he was not too far gone to hear her great cry and the rush of multitudes of soft feet, followed by the sounds of something heaved up against the rock, after which came a multitudinous patter of stones falling near him. The last had not ceased when he grew very faint, for his head had been badly cut, and at last insensible. When he came to himself, there was perfect silence about him, and utter darkness, but for the merest glimmer in one tiny spot. He crawled to it, and found that they had heaved a slab against the mouth of the hole, past the edge of which a poor little gleam found its way from the fire. He could not move it a hairbreadth, for they had piled a great heap of stones against it. He crawled back to where he had been lying, in the faint hope of finding his pickaxe. But after a vain search, he was at last compelled to acknowledge himself in an evil plight. He sat down and tried to think, but soon fell fast asleep. Chapter 19. Goblin Counsels. He must have slept a long time, for when he awoke he felt wonderfully restored, indeed almost well, and very hungry. There were voices in the outer cave. Once more, then, it was night, for the goblins slept during the day and went about their affairs during the night. In the universal and constant darkness of their dwelling, they had no reason to prefer the one arrangement to the other. But from aversion to the Sun People, they chose to be busy when there was least chance of their being met either by the miners below, when they were burrowing, or by the people of the mountain above, when they were feeding their sheep or catching their goats. And indeed it was only when the sun was away that the outside of the mountain was sufficiently like their own dismal regions to be endurable to their mole eyes. So thoroughly had they become unaccustomed to any light beyond that of their own fires and torches. Curdie listened, and soon found that they were talking of himself. "How long will it take?" asked Harelip. "Not many days, I should think," answered the king. "They are poor feeble creatures, those Sun People, and want to be always eating. We can go a week at a time without food and be all the better for it, but I've been told they eat 2 or 3 times every day. Can you believe it? They must be quite hollow inside, not at all like us, 9/10 of whose bulk is solid flesh and bone. Yes, I judge a week of starvation will do for him." "If I may be allowed a word," interposed the queen, "and I think I ought to have some voice in the matter." "The wretch is entirely at your disposal, my spouse," interrupted the king. "He is your property. You caught him yourself. We should never have done it." The queen laughed. She seemed in far better humor than the night before. "I was about to say," she resumed, "that it does seem a pity to waste so much fresh meat." "What are you thinking of, my love?" said the king. "The very notion of starving him implies that we are not going to give him any meat, either salt or fresh." "I'm not such a stupid as that comes to," returned Her Majesty. "What I mean is that by the time he is starved, there will hardly be a picking upon his bones." The king gave a great laugh. "Well, my spouse, you may have him when you like," he said. "I don't fancy him for my part. I am pretty sure he is tough eating." "That would be to honor instead of punish his insolence," returned the queen. "But why should our poor creatures be deprived of so much nourishment? Our little dogs and cats and pigs and small bears would enjoy him very much." "You are best of housekeepers, my lovely queen," said her husband. "Let it be so by all means. Let us have our people in and get him out and kill him at once. He deserves it. The mischief he might have brought upon us, now that he had penetrated so far as our most retired citadel, is incalculable. Or rather, let us tie him hand and foot, and have the pleasure of seeing him torn to pieces by full torchlight in the great hall." "Better and better," cried the queen and the prince together, both of them clapping their hands. And the prince made an ugly noise with his hare lip, just as if he had intended to be one at the feast. "But," added the queen, bethinking herself, "he is so troublesome. For poor creatures as they are, there is something about those Sun People that is very troublesome. I cannot imagine how it is that with such superior strength and skill and understanding as ours, we permit them to exist at all. Why do we not destroy them entirely and use their cattle and grazing lands at our pleasure? Of course we don't want to live in their horrid country. It is far too glaring for our quieter and more refined tastes. But we might use it as a sort of outhouse, you know. Even our creatures' eyes might get used to it, and if they did grow blind that would be of no consequence, provided they grew fat as well. But we might even keep their great cows and other creatures. And then we should have a few more luxuries, such as cream and cheese, which at present we only taste occasionally, when our brave men have succeeded in carrying some off from their farms." "It is worth thinking of," said the king, "and I don't know why you should be the first to suggest it, except that you have a positive genius for conquest. But still, as you say, there is something very troublesome about them, and it would be better, as I understand you to suggest, that we should starve him for a day or two first, so that he may be a little less frisky when we take him out. Once there was a goblin, living in a hole. Busy he was cobbling, a shoe without a sole. By came a birdie. Goblin, what do you do? Cobble at a sturdy upper leather shoe. What's the good o' that, sir? Said the little bird. Why, it's very pat, sir. Plain without a word. Where 'tis all a hole, sir. Never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no soles? What's that horrible noise? Cried the queen, shuddering from pot metal head to granite shoes. I declare, said the king with solemn indignation, it's the sun creature in the hole. Stop that disgusting noise, cried the crown prince valiantly, getting up and standing in front of the heap of stones with his face towards Curdy's prison. Do now, or I'll break your head. Break away, shouted Curdy, and began singing again. Once there was a goblin, living in a hole. I really cannot bear it, said the queen. If I could only get at his horrid toes with my slippers again. I think we had better go to bed, said the king. It's not time to go to bed, said the queen. I would if I was you, said Curdy. Impertinent wretch, said the queen with the utmost scorn in her voice. An impossible if, said his majesty with dignity. Quite, returned Curdy, and began singing again. Go to bed. Goblin do. Help the queen. Take off her shoe. If you do, it will disclose a horrid set of sprouting toes. What a lie, roared the queen in a rage. By the way, that reminds me, said the king, that for as long as we have been married, I have never seen your feet, queen. I think you might take off your shoes when you go to bed. They positively hurt me sometimes. I will do as I like, retorted the queen sulkily. You ought to do as your own hubby wishes you, said the king. I will not, said the queen. Then I insist upon it, said the king. Apparently, his majesty approached the queen for the purpose of following the advice given by Curdy, for the latter heard a scuffle, and then a great roar from the king. Will you be quiet then, said the queen wickedly. Yes, yes, queen, I only meant to coax you. Hands off, cried the queen triumphantly. I'm going to bed. You may come when you like, but as long as I am queen, I will sleep in my shoes. It is my royal privilege. Harelip, go to bed. I'm going, said Harelip sleepily. So am I, said the king. Come along then, said the queen, and mind you are good or I'll. Oh no, 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 screamed the king in the most supplicating of tones. Curdy heard only a muttered reply in the distance, and then the cave was quite still. They had left the fire burning, and the light came through brighter than before. Curdy thought it was time to try again if anything could be done, but he found he could not get even a finger through the chink between the slab and the rock. He gave a great rush with his shoulder against the slab, but it yielded no more than if it had been part of the rock. All he could do was to sit down and think again. By and by he came to the resolution to pretend to be dying, in the hope they might take him out before his strength was too much exhausted to let him have a chance. Then, for the creatures, if he could but find his axe again, he would have no fear of them, and if it were not for the queen's horrid shoes, he would have no fear at all. Meantime, until they should come again at night, there was nothing for him to do but forge new rhymes, now his only weapons. He had no intention of using them at present, of course, but it was well to have a stock, for he might live to want them, and the manufacture of them would help to while away the time. Chapter 20. Irene's Clue. That same morning early, the princess woke in a terrible fright. There was a hideous noise in her room, creatures snarling and hissing and rocketing about as if they were fighting. The moment she came to herself, she remembered something she had never thought of again, what her grandmother told her to do when she was frightened. She immediately took off her ring and put it under her pillow. As she did so, she fancied she felt a finger and thumb take it gently from under her palm. "It must be my grandmother," she said to herself, and the thought gave her such courage that she stopped to put on her dainty little slippers before running from the room. While doing this, she caught sight of a long cloak of sky blue, thrown over the back of a chair by the bedside. She had never seen it before, but it was evidently waiting for her. She put it on, and then, feeling with the forefinger of her right hand, soon found her grandmother's thread, which she proceeded at once to follow, expecting it would lead her straight up the old stair. When she reached the door, she found it went down and ran along the floor, so that she had almost to crawl in order to keep a hold of it. Then, to her surprise, and somewhat to her dismay, she found that instead of leading her towards the stair, it turned in quite the opposite direction. It led her through certain narrow passages towards the kitchen, turning aside ere she reached it, and guiding her to a door which communicated with a small backyard. Some of the maids were already up, and this door was standing open. Across the yard, the thread still ran along the ground, until it brought her to a door in the wall which opened upon the mountainside. When she had passed through, the thread rose to about half her height, and she could hold it with ease as she walked. It led her straight up the mountain. The cause of her alarm was less frightful than she supposed. The cook's great black cat, pursued by the housekeeper's terrier, had bounced against her bedroom door, which had not been properly fastened, and the two had burst into the room together and commenced a battle royal. How the nurse came to sleep through it was a mystery, but I suspect the old lady had something to do with it. It was a clear, warm morning. The wind blew deliciously over the mountainside. Here and there she saw a late primrose, but she did not stop to call upon them. The sky was mottled with small clouds. The sun was not yet up, but some of their fluffy edges had caught his light, and hung out orange and gold-colored fringes upon the air. The dew lay in round drops upon the leaves, and hung like tiny diamond ear-rings from the blades of grass about her path. "How lovely that bit of gossamer is," thought the princess, looking at a long undulating line that shone at some distance from her up the hill. It was not the time for gossamers, though, and Irene soon discovered that it was her own thread she saw shining on before her in the light of the morning. It was leading her she knew not whither, but she had never in her life been out before sunrise, and everything was so fresh and cool and lively and full of something coming, that she felt too happy to be afraid of anything. After leading her up a good distance, the thread turned to the left, and down the path upon which she and Ludi had met Curdie. But she never thought of that, for now in the morning light, with its far outlook over the country, no path could have been more open and airy and cheerful. She could see the road almost to the horizon, along which she had so often watched her King Papa and his troop come shining, with the bugle blast cleaving the air before them, and it was like a companion to her. Down and down the path went, then up, and then down and then up again, getting rugged and more rugged as it went. And still along the path went the silvery thread, and still along the thread went Irene's little rosy-tipped forefinger. By and by she came to a little stream that jabbered and prattled down the hill, and up the side of the stream went both path and thread. And still the path grew rougher and steeper, and the mountain grew wilder, till Irene began to think she was going a very long way from home. And when she turned to look back, she saw that the level country had vanished and the rough, bare mountain had closed eye in about her. But still on went the thread and on went the princess. Everything around her was getting brighter and brighter as the sun came nearer, till at length his first rays all at once alighted on the top of a rock before her, like some golden creature fresh from the sky. Then she saw that the little stream ran out of a hole in that rock, that the path did not go past the rock, and that the thread was leading her straight up to it. A shudder ran through her from head to foot when she found that the thread was actually taking her into the hole out of which the stream ran. It ran out babbling joyously, but she had to go in. She did not hesitate. Right into the hole she went, which was high enough to let her walk without stooping. For a little way there was a brown glimmer, but at the first turn it all but ceased, and before she had gone many paces she was in total darkness. Then she began to be frightened indeed. Every moment she kept feeling the thread backwards and forwards, and as she went farther and farther into the darkness of the great hollow mountain, she kept thinking more and more about her grandmother, and all that she had said to her, and how kind she had been, and how beautiful she was, and all about her lovely room, and the fire of roses, and the great lamp that sent its light through stone walls. And she became more and more sure that the thread could not have gone there of itself, and that her grandmother must have sent it. But it tried her dreadfully when the path went down very steep, and especially when she came to places where she had to go down rough stairs, and even sometimes a ladder. Through one narrow passage after another, over lumps of rock and sand and clay, the thread guided her, until she came to a small hole through which she had to creep. Finding no change on the other side, "Shall I ever get back?" she thought over and over again, wondering at herself that she was not 10 times more frightened, and often feeling as if she were only walking in the story of a dream. Sometimes she heard the noise of water, a dull gurgling inside the rock. By and by she heard the sounds of blows which came nearer and nearer, but again they grew duller and almost died away. In 100 directions she turned, obedient to the guiding thread. At last she spied a dull red shine and came up to the mica window, and thence away and round about and right into a cavern where glowed the red embers of a fire. Here the thread began to rise. It rose as high as her head and higher still. What should she do if she lost her hold? She was pulling it down. She might break it. She could see it far up, glowing as red as her fire opal in the light of the embers. But presently she came to a huge heap of stones, piled in a slope against the wall of the cavern. On these she climbed, and soon recovered the level of the thread, only however to find, the next moment, that it vanished through the heap of stones, and left her standing on it, with her face to the solid rock. For one terrible moment she felt as if her grandmother had forsaken her. The thread which the spiders had spun far over the seas, which her grandmother had sat in the moonlight and spun again for her, which she had tempered in the rose fire and tied to her opal ring, had left her, had gone where she could no longer follow it, had brought her into a horrible cavern and there left her. She was forsaken indeed. "When shall I wake?" she said to herself in an agony, but the same moment knew that it was no dream. She threw herself upon the heap and began to cry. It was well she did not know what creatures, one of them with stone shoes on her feet, were lying in the next cave, but neither did she know who was on the other side of the slab. At length the thought struck her that at least she could follow the thread backwards and thus get out of the mountain and home. She rose at once and found the thread, but the instant she tried to feel it backwards, it vanished from her touch. Forwards, it led her hand up to the heap of stones. Backwards it seemed nowhere. Neither could she see it as before in the light of the fire. She burst into a wailing cry and again threw herself down on the stones. Chapter 21. The Escape. As the princess lay and sobbed, she kept feeling the thread mechanically, following it with her finger many times up to the stones in which it disappeared. By and by she began, still mechanically, to poke her finger in after it between the stones as far as she could. All at once it came into her head that she might remove some of the stones and see where the thread went next. Almost laughing at herself for never having thought of this before, she jumped to her feet. Her fear vanished. Once more she was certain her grandmother's thread could not have brought her there just to leave her there, and she began to throw away the stones from the top as fast as she could, sometimes 2 or 3 at a handful, sometimes taking both hands to lift one. After clearing them away a little, she found that the thread turned and went straight downwards. Hence, as the heap sloped a good deal, growing of course wider towards its base, she had to throw away a multitude of stones to follow the thread. But this was not all, for she soon found that the thread, after going straight down for a little way, turned first sideways in one direction, then sideways in another, and then shot at various angles, hither and thither inside the heap, so that she began to be afraid that to clear the thread she must remove the whole huge gathering. She was dismayed at the very idea, but, losing no time, set to work with a will, and with aching back and bleeding fingers and hands, she worked on, sustained by the pleasure of seeing the heap slowly diminish and begin to show itself on the opposite side of the fire. Another thing which helped to keep up her courage was that, as often as she uncovered a turn of the thread, instead of lying loose upon the stone, it tightened up. This made her sure that her grandmother was at the end of it somewhere. She had got about halfway down when she started and nearly fell with fright. Close to her ears as it seemed, a voice broke out singing, "Jabber bother smash. You'll have it all in a crash. Jabber smash bother. You'll have the worst of the pother. Smash bother jabber." Here Curdie stopped, either because he could not find a rhyme to jabber, or because he remembered what he had forgotten when he woke up at the sound of Irene's labors, that his plan was to make the goblins think he was getting weak. But he had uttered enough to let Irene know who he was. "It's Curdie," she cried joyfully. "Hush, hush," came Curdie's voice again from somewhere. "Speak softly." "Why, you were singing loud," said Irene. "Yes, but they know I am here and they don't know you are. Who are you?" "I'm Irene," answered the princess. "I know who you are quite well, you're Curdie." "Why, however did you come here, Irene?" "My great-great-grandmother sent me, and I think I've found out why. You can't get out, I suppose." "No, I can't. What are you doing?" "Clearing away a huge heap of stones." "There's a princess," exclaimed Curdie in a tone of delight, but still speaking in little more than a whisper. "I can't think how you got here, though." "My grandmother sent me after her thread." "I don't know what you mean," said Curdie, "but so you're there it doesn't much matter." "Oh, yes, it does," returned Irene. "I should never have been here but for her." "You can tell me all about it when we get out, then. There's no time to lose now," said Curdie. And Irene went to work, as fresh as when she began. "There's such a lot of stones," she said. "It will take me a long time to get them all away." "How far on have you got?" asked Curdie. "I've got about the half away, but the other half is ever so much bigger." "I don't think you will have to move the lower half. Do you see a slab laid up against the wall?" Irene looked and felt about with her hands, and soon perceived the outlines of the slab. "Yes," she answered, "I do." "Then, I think," rejoined Curdie, "when you have cleared the slab about halfway down or a bit more, I shall be able to push it over." "I must follow my thread," returned Irene, "whatever I do." "What do you mean?" exclaimed Curdie. "You will see when you get out," answered the princess, and went on harder than ever. But she was soon satisfied that what Curdie wanted done and what the thread wanted done were one and the same thing, for she not only saw that by following the turns of the thread she had been clearing the face of the slab, but that, a little more than halfway down, The thread went through the chink between the slab and the wall into the place where Curdie was confined, so that she could not follow it any farther until the slab was out of her way. As soon as she found this, she said in a right joyous whisper, "Now, Curdie, I think if you were to give a great push, the slab would tumble over." "Stand quite clear of it then," said Curdie, "and let me know when you are ready." Irene got off the heap and stood on one side of it. "Now, Curdie," she cried. Curdie gave a great rush with his shoulder against it. Out tumbled the slab on the heap, and out crept Curdie over the top of it. "You've saved my life, Irene," he whispered. "Oh, Curdie, I'm so glad. Let's get out of this horrid place as fast as we can." "That's easier said than done," returned he. "Oh no, it's quite easy," said Irene. "We have only to follow my thread. I am sure that it's going to take us out now." She had already begun to follow it over the fallen slab into the hole, while Curdie was searching the floor of the cavern for his pickaxe. "Here it is," he cried. "No, it is not," he added in a disappointed tone. "What can it be then? I declare it's a torch. That is jolly. It's better almost than my pickaxe. Much better if it weren't for those stone shoes," he went on, as he lighted the torch by blowing the last embers of the expiring fire. When he looked up, with the lighted torch casting a glare into the great darkness of the huge cavern, he caught sight of Irene disappearing in the hole out of which he had himself just come. "Where are you going there?" he cried. "That's not the way out. That's where I couldn't get out." "I know that," whispered Irene. "But this is the way my thread goes, and I must follow it." "What nonsense the child talks," said Curdie to himself. "I must follow her, though, and see that she comes to no harm. She will soon find she can't get out that way, and then she will come with me." So he crept over the slab once more into the hole with his torch in his hand. But when he looked about in it, he could see her nowhere. And now he discovered that although the hole was narrow, it was much longer than he had supposed. For in one direction the roof came down very low, and the hole went off in a narrow passage, of which he could not see the end. The princess must have crept in there. He got on his knees in one hand, holding the torch with the other, and crept after her. The hole twisted about, in some parts so low that he could hardly get through, in others so high that he could not see the roof, but everywhere it was narrow, far too narrow for a goblin to get through, and so I presume they never thought that Curdie might. He was beginning to feel very uncomfortable lest something should have befallen the princess, when he heard her voice almost close to his ear, whispering, "Aren't you coming, Curdie?" And when he turned the next corner, there she stood waiting for him. "I knew you couldn't go wrong in that narrow hole, but now you must keep by me, for here is a great wide place," she said. "I can't understand it," said Curdie, half to himself, half to Irene. "Never mind," she returned. "Wait till we get out." Curdie, utterly astonished that she had already got so far, and by a path he had known nothing of, thought it better to let her do as she pleased. "At all events," he said again to himself, "I know nothing about the way, minor as I am, and she seems to think she does know something about it, though how she should passes my comprehension. So she's just as likely to find her way as I am, and as she insists on taking the lead, I must follow. We can't be much worse off than we are anyhow." Reasoning thus, he followed her a few steps and came out in another great cavern, across which Irene walked in a straight line, as confidently as if she knew every step of the way. Curdie went on after her, flashing his torch about, and trying to see something of what lay around them. Suddenly he started back a pace as the light fell upon something close by which Irene was passing. It was a platform of rock raised a few feet from the floor and covered with sheepskins, upon which lay two horrible figures asleep, at once recognized by Curdie as the king and queen of the goblins. He lowered his torch instantly lest the light should awake them. As he did so, it flashed upon his pickaxe, lying by the side of the queen, whose hand lay close by the handle of it. "Stop one moment," he whispered. "Hold my torch and don't let the light on their faces." Irene shuddered when she saw the frightful creatures, whom she had passed without observing them, but she did as he requested, and turning her back, held the torch low in front of her. Curdie drew his pickaxe carefully away, and as he did so spied one of her feet, projecting from under the skins. The great clumsy granite shoe, exposed thus to his hand, was a temptation not to be resisted. He laid hold of it, and with cautious efforts drew it off. The moment he succeeded, he saw to his astonishment that what he had sung in ignorance to annoy the queen was actually true. She had 6 horrible toes. Overjoyed at his success, and seeing by the huge bump in the sheepskins where the other foot was, he proceeded to lift them gently, for, if he could only succeed in carrying away the other shoe as well, he would be no more afraid of the goblins than of so many flies. But as he pulled at the second shoe, the queen gave a growl and sat up in bed. The same instant the king awoke also, and sat up beside her. "Run, Irene," cried Curdie, for though he was not now in the least afraid for himself, he was for the princess. Irene looked once round, saw the fearful creatures awake, and like the wise princess she was, dashed the torch on the ground and extinguished it, crying out, "Here, Curdie, take my hand." He darted to her side, forgetting neither the queen's shoe nor his pickaxe, and caught hold of her hand, as she sped fearlessly where her thread guided her. They heard the queen give a great bellow, but they had a good start, for it would be some time before they could get torches lighted to pursue them. Just as they thought they saw a gleam behind them, the thread brought them to a very narrow opening, through which Irene crept easy. Lie and Curdie with difficulty. "Now," said Curdie, "I think we shall be safe." "Of course we shall," returned Irene. "Why do you think so?" asked Curdie. "Because my grandmother is taking care of us." "That's all nonsense," said Curdie. "I don't know what you mean." "Then if you don't know what I mean, what right have you to call it nonsense?" asked the princess, a little offended. "I beg your pardon, Irene," said Curdie. "I did not mean to vex you." "Of course not," returned the princess. "But why do you think we shall be safe?" "Because the king and queen are far too stout to get through that hole." "There might be ways round," said the princess. "To be sure there might. We are not out of it yet," acknowledged Curdie. "But what do you mean by the king and queen?" asked the princess. "I should never call such creatures as those a king and a queen." "Their own people do, though," answered Curdie. The princess asked more questions, and Curdie, as they walked leisurely along, gave her a full account, not only of the character and habits of the goblins, so far as he knew them, but of his own adventures with them, beginning from the very night after that in which he had met her and Ludi upon the mountain. When he had finished, he begged Irene to tell him how it was that she had come to his rescue. So Irene too had to tell a long story, which she did in rather a roundabout manner, interrupted by many questions concerning things she had not explained. But her tale, as he did not believe more than half of it, left everything as unaccountable to him as before, and he was nearly as much perplexed as to what he must think of the princess. He could not believe that she was deliberately telling stories, and the only conclusion he could come to was that Ludi had been playing the child tricks, inventing no end of lies to frighten her for her own purposes. "But how ever did Ludi come to let you go into the mountains alone?" he asked. "Ludi knows nothing about it. I left her fast asleep, at least I think so. I hope my grandmother won't let her get into trouble, for it wasn't her fault at all, as my grandmother very well knows." "But how did you find your way to me?" persisted Curdie. "I told you already," answered Irene, "by keeping my finger upon my grandmother's thread, as I am doing now." "You don't mean you've got the thread there?" "Of course I do. I have told you so 10 times already. I have hardly, except when I was removing the stones, taken my finger off it. There, she added, guiding Curdy's hand to the thread. You feel it yourself, don't you? I feel nothing at all, replied Curdy. Then what can be the matter with your finger? I feel it perfectly. To be sure, it is very thin, and in the sunlight looks just like the thread of a spider, though there are many of them twisted together to make it. But for all that, I can't think why you shouldn't feel it as well as I do. Curdy was too polite to say he did not believe there was any thread there at all. What he did say was, "Well, I can make nothing of it." "I can, though, and you must be glad of that, for it will do for both of us." "We're not out yet," said Curdy. "We soon shall be," returned Irene confidently. And now the thread went downwards and led Irene's hand to a hole in the floor of the cavern, whence came a sound of running water which they had been hearing for some time. "It goes into the ground now, Curdy," she said, stopping. He had been listening to another sound, which his practiced ear had caught long ago, and which also had been growing louder. It was the noise the Goblin miners made at their work, and they seemed to be at no great distance now. Irene heard it the moment she stopped. "What is that noise?" she asked. "Do you know, Curdy?" "Yes, it is the goblins digging and burrowing," he answered. "And you don't know what they do it for?" "No, I haven't the least idea. Would you like to see them?" he asked, wishing to have another try after their secret. "If my thread took me there, I shouldn't much mind. But I don't want to see them, and I can't leave my thread. It leads me down into the hole, and we had better go at once." "Very well, shall I go in first?" said Curdy. "No, better not. You can't feel the thread," she answered, stepping down through a narrow break in the floor of the cavern. "Oh," she cried, "I am in the water. It is running strong, but it is not deep, and there is just room to walk. Make haste, Curdy." He tried, but the hole was too small for him to get in. "Go on a little bit," he said, shouldering his pickaxe. In a few moments he had cleared a larger opening and followed her. They went on, down and down with the running water, Curdy getting more and more afraid it was leading them to some terrible gulf in the heart of the mountain. In one or two places he had to break away the rock to make room before even Irene could get through, at least without hurting herself. But at length they spied a glimmer of light, and in a minute more they were almost blinded by the full sunlight, into which they emerged. It was some little time before the princess could see well enough to discover that they stood in her own garden, close by the seat on which she and her King Papa had sat that afternoon. They had come out by the channel of the little stream. She danced and clapped her hands with delight. "Now, Curdy," she cried, "won't you believe what I told you about my grandmother and her thread?" For she had felt all the time that Curdy was not believing what she told him. "There, don't you see it shining on before us?" she added. "I don't see anything," persisted Curdy. "Then you must believe without seeing," said the princess, "for you can't deny it has brought us out of the mountain." "I can't deny we are out of the mountain, and I should be very ungrateful indeed to deny that you had brought me out of it." "I couldn't have done it but for the thread," persisted Irene. "That's the part I don't understand." "Well, come along, and Ludi will get you something to eat. I am sure you must want it very much." "Indeed I do. But my father and mother will be so anxious about me. I must make haste, first up the mountain to tell my mother, and then down into the mine again to let my father know." "Very well, Curdy. But you can't get out without coming this way, and I will take you through the house, for that is nearest." They met no one by the way, for, indeed, as before, the people were here and there and everywhere searching for the princess. When they got in, Irene found that the thread, as she had half expected, went up the old staircase, and a new thought struck her. She turned to Curdy and said, "My grandmother wants me. Do come up with me and see her. Then you will know that I have been telling you the truth. Do come to please me, Curdy. I can't bear you should think what I say is not true." "I never doubted you believed what you said," returned Curdy. "I only thought you had some fancy in your head that was not correct. But do come, dear Curdy." The little miner could not withstand this appeal, and though he felt shy in what seemed to him a huge grand house, he yielded and followed her up the stair. Chapter 22. The Old Lady and Curdy. Up the stair then they went, and the next and the next, and through the long rows of empty rooms and up the little tower stair, Irene growing happier and happier as she ascended. There was no answer when she knocked at length at the door of the workroom, nor could she hear any sound of the spinning wheel, and once more her heart sank within her, but only for one moment as she turned and knocked at the other door. "Come in," answered the sweet voice of her grandmother, and Irene opened the door and entered, followed by Curdy. "You darling," cried the lady, who was seated by a fire of red roses mingled with white. "I've been waiting for you, and indeed getting a little anxious about you, and beginning to think whether I had not better go and fetch you myself." As she spoke, she took the little princess in her arms and placed her upon her lap. She was dressed in white now, and looking if possible more lovely than ever. "I've brought Curdy, grandmother. He wouldn't believe what I told him, and so I've brought him." "Yes, I see him. He is a good boy, Curdy, and a brave boy. Aren't you glad you've got him out?" "Yes, grandmother, but it wasn't very good of him not to believe me when I was telling him the truth. People must believe what they can, and those who believe more must not be hard upon those who believe less. I doubt if you would have believed it all yourself if you hadn't seen some of it." "Ah, yes, grandmother, I dare say. I'm sure you are right, but he'll believe now." "I don't know that," replied her grandmother. "Won't you, Curdy?" said Irene, looking round at him as she asked the question. He was standing in the middle of the floor, staring and looking strangely bewildered. This she thought came of his astonishment at the beauty of the lady. "Make a bow to my grandmother, Curdy," she said. "I don't see any grandmother," answered Curdy rather gruffly. "Don't see my grandmother when I'm sitting in her lap?" exclaimed the princess. "No, I don't," reiterated Curdy in an offended tone. "Don't you see the lovely fire of roses, white ones amongst them this time?" asked Irene, almost as bewildered as he. "No, I don't," answered Curdy almost sulkily. "Nor the blue bed, nor the rose-colored counterpane, nor the beautiful light like the moon hanging from the roof. You're making game of me, your royal highness, and after what we have come through together this day, I don't think it is kind of you," said Curdy, feeling very much hurt. "Then what do you see?" asked Irene, who perceived at once that for her not to believe him was at least as bad as for him not to believe her. "I see a big, bare garret room, like the one in Mother's cottage, only big enough to take the cottage itself in, and leave a good margin all round," answered Curdy. "And what more do you see?" "I see a tub, and a heap of musty straw, and a withered apple, and a ray of sunlight coming through a hole in the middle of the roof and shining on your head, and making all the place look a curious dusky brown. I think you had better drop it, princess, and go down to the nursery, like a good girl." "But don't you hear my grandmother talking to me?" asked Irene, almost crying. "No, I hear the cooing of a lot of pigeons. If you won't come down, I will go without you. I think that will be better anyhow, for I'm sure nobody who met us would believe a word we said to them. They would think we made it all up. I don't expect anybody but my own father and mother to believe me. They know I wouldn't tell a story." "And yet you won't believe me, Curdy," expostulated the princess, now fairly crying with vexation and sorrow at the gulf between her and Curdy. "No, I can't, and I can't help it," said Curdie, turning to leave the room. "What shall I do, grandmother?" sobbed the princess, turning her face round upon the lady's bosom and shaking with suppressed sobs. "You must give him time," said her grandmother, "and you must be content not to be believed for a while. It is very hard to bear, but I have had to bear it and shall have to bear it many a time yet. I will take care of what Curdie thinks of you in the end. You must let him go now." "You're not coming, are you?" asked Curdie. "No, Curdie. My grandmother says I must let you go. Turn to the right when you get to the bottom of all the stairs, and that will take you to the hall where the great door is." "Oh, I don't doubt I can find my way, without you, princess, or your old granny's thread either," said Curdie quite rudely. "Oh, Curdie, Curdie. I wish I had gone home at once. I'm very much obliged to you, Irene, for getting me out of that hole, but I wish you hadn't made a fool of me afterwards." He said this as he opened the door, which he left open, and without another word went down the stair. Irene listened with dismay to his departing footsteps, then turning again to the lady. "What does it all mean, grandmother?" She sobbed and burst into fresh tears. "It means, my love, that I did not mean to show myself. Curdie is not yet able to believe some things. Seeing is not believing, it is only seeing. You remember I told you that if Ludi were to see me, she would rub her eyes, forget the half she saw, and call the other half nonsense." "Yes, but I should have thought Curdie." "You are right. Curdie is much farther on than Ludi, and you will see what will come of it. But in the meantime you must be content, I say, to be misunderstood for a while. We are all very anxious to be understood, and it is very hard not to be. But there is one thing much more necessary." "What is that, grandmother?" "To understand other people." "Yes, grandmother, I must be fair, for if I'm not fair to other people, I'm not worth being understood myself." "I see. So as Curdie can't help it, I will not be vexed with him, but just wait." "There's my own dear child," said her grandmother, and pressed her close to her bosom. "Why weren't you in your workroom when we came up, grandmother?" asked Irene, after a few moments' silence. "If I had been there, Curdie would have seen me well enough. But why should I be there rather than in this beautiful room?" "I thought you would be spinning." "I've nobody to spin for just at present. I never spin without knowing for whom I am spinning." "That reminds me, there is one thing that puzzles me," said the princess. "How are you to get the thread out of the mountain again? Surely you won't have to make another for me. That would be such a trouble." The lady set her down and rose and went to the fire. Putting in her hand, she drew it out again and held up the shining ball between her finger and thumb. "I've got it now, you see," she said, coming back to the princess, "all ready for you when you want it." Going to her cabinet, she laid it in the same drawer as before. "And here is your ring," she added, taking it from the little finger of her left hand and putting it on the forefinger of Irene's right hand. "Oh, thank you, grandmother. I feel so safe now." "You are very tired, my child," the lady went on. "Your hands are hurt with the stones, and I have counted 9 bruises on you. Just look what you are like." And she held up to her a little mirror which she had brought from the cabinet. The princess burst into a merry laugh at the sight. She was so draggled with the stream and dirty with creeping through narrow places, that if she had seen the reflection without knowing it was a reflection, she would have taken herself for some gypsy child whose face was washed and hair combed about once in a month. The lady laughed too, and lifting her again upon her knee, took off her cloak and nightgown. Then she carried her to the side of the room. Irene wondered what she was going to do with her, but asked no questions, only starting a little when she found that she was going to lay her in the large silver bath. For as she looked into it, again she saw no bottom, but the stars shining miles away, as it seemed, in a great blue gulf. Her hands closed involuntarily on the beautiful arms that held her, and that was all. The lady pressed her once more to her bosom, saying, "Do not be afraid, my child." "No, grandmother," answered the princess, with a little gasp, and the next instant she sank in the clear, cool water. When she opened her eyes, she saw nothing but a strange, lovely blue over and beneath and all about her. The lady and the beautiful room had vanished from her sight, and she seemed utterly alone. But instead of being afraid, she felt more than happy, perfectly blissful. And from somewhere came the voice of the lady, singing a strange, sweet song of which she could distinguish every word, but of the sense she had only a feeling, no understanding. Nor could she remember a single line after it was gone. It vanished, like the poetry in a dream, as fast as it came. In after years, however, she would sometimes fancy that snatches of melody suddenly rising in her brain must be little phrases and fragments of the air of that song, and the very fancy would make her happier and abler to do her duty. How long she lay in the water she did not know. It seemed a long time, not from weariness but from pleasure. But at last she felt the beautiful hands lay hold of her, and through the gurgling water she was lifted out into the lovely room. The lady carried her to the fire and sat down with her in her lap and dried her tenderly with the softest towel. It was so different from Ludi's drying. When the lady had done, she stooped to the fire and drew from it her nightgown, as white as snow. "How delicious!" exclaimed the princess. "It smells of all the roses in the world, I think." When she stood up on the floor, she felt as if she had been made over again. Every bruise and all weariness were gone, and her hands were soft and whole as ever. "Now I am going to put you to bed for a good sleep," said her grandmother. "But what will Ludi be thinking? And what am I to say to her when she asks me where I have been?" "Don't trouble yourself about it. You will find it all come right," said her grandmother, and laid her into the blue bed under the rosy counterpane. "There is just one thing more," said Irene. "I am a little anxious about Curdie. As I brought him into the house, I ought to have seen him safe on his way home." "I took care of all that," answered the lady. "I told you to let him go, and therefore I was bound to look after him. Nobody saw him, and he is now eating a good dinner in his mother's cottage far up in the mountain." "Then I will go to sleep," said Irene, and in a few minutes she was fast asleep. Chapter 23. Curdie and his mother. Curdie went up the mountain neither whistling nor singing, for he was vexed with Irene for taking him in, as he called it, and he was vexed with himself for having spoken to her so angrily. His mother gave a cry of joy when she saw him, and at once set about getting him something to eat, asking him questions all the time, which he did not answer so cheerfully as usual. When his meal was ready, she left him to eat it, and hurried to the mine to let his father know he was safe. When she came back, she found him fast asleep upon her bed, nor did he wake until his father came home in the evening. "Now, Curdie," his mother said, as they sat at supper, "tell us the whole story from beginning to end, just as it all happened." Curdie obeyed, and told everything to the point where they came out upon the lawn in the garden of the king's house. "And what happened after that?" asked his mother. "You haven't told us all. You ought to be very happy at having got away from those demons, and instead of that I never saw you so gloomy. There must be something more. Besides, you do not speak of that lovely child as I should like to hear you. She saved your life at the risk of her own, and yet somehow you don't seem to think much of it." "She talked such nonsense," answered Curdie, "and told me a pack of things that weren't a bit true, and I can't get over it." "What were they?" asked his father. "Your mother may be able to throw some light upon them." Then Curdie made a clean breast of it, and told them everything. They all sat silent for some time, pondering the strange tale. At last Curdie's mother spoke. "You confess, my boy," she said. "There is something about the whole affair you do not understand." "Yes, of course, mother," he answered. "I cannot understand how a child knowing nothing about the mountain, or even that I was shut up in it, should come all that way alone, straight to where I was, and then, after getting me out of the hole, lead me out of the mountain too, where I should not have known a step of the way if it had been as light as in the open air." "Then you have no right to say what she told you was not true. She did take you out, and she must have had something to guide her. Why not a thread as well as a rope, or anything else? There is something you cannot explain, and her explanation may be the right one." "It's no explanation at all, mother, and I can't believe it." "That may be only because you do not understand it. If you did, you would probably find it was an explanation and believe it thoroughly. I don't blame you for not being able to believe it, but I do blame you for fancying such a child would try to deceive you. Why should she? Depend upon it, she told you all she knew. Until you had found a better way of accounting for it all, you might at least have been more sparing of your judgment." "That is what something inside me has been saying all the time," said Curdie, hanging down his head. "But what do you make of the grandmother? That is what I can't get over. To take me up to an old garret and try to persuade me against the sight of my own eyes that it was a beautiful room, with blue walls and silver stars and no end of things in it, when there was nothing there but an old tub and a withered apple and a heap of straw and a sunbeam. It was too bad. She might have had some old woman there, at least to pass for her precious grandmother. Didn't she speak as if she saw those other things herself, Curdie?" "Yes, that's what bothers me. You would have thought she really meant and believed that she saw every one of the things she talked about, and not one of them there. It was too bad, I say." "Perhaps some people can see things other people can't see, Curdie," said his mother very gravely. "I think I will tell you something I saw myself once, only perhaps you won't believe me either." "Oh, mother, mother," cried Curdie, bursting into tears. "I don't deserve that, surely." "But what I am going to tell you is very strange," persisted his mother. "And if having heard it you were to say I must have been dreaming, I don't know that I should have any right to be vexed with you, though I know at least that I was not asleep." "Do tell me, mother. Perhaps it will help me to think better of the princess." "That's why I am tempted to tell you," replied his mother. "But first, I may as well mention that according to old whispers, there is something more than common about the king's family, and the queen was of the same blood, for they were cousins of some degree. There were strange stories told concerning them, all good stories, but strange, very strange. What they were I cannot tell, for I only remember the faces of my grandmother and my mother as they talked together about them. There was wonder and awe, not fear, in their eyes, and they whispered and never spoke aloud. But what I saw myself was this. Your father was going to work in the mine one night, and I had been down with his supper. It was soon after we were married, and not very long before you were born. He came with me to the mouth of the mine, and left me to go home alone, for I knew the way almost as well as the floor of our own cottage. It was pretty dark, and in some parts of the road where the rocks overhung nearly quite dark. But I got along perfectly well, never thinking of being afraid, until I reached a spot you know well enough, Curdie, where the path has to make a sharp turn out of the way of a great rock on the left-hand side. When I got there, I was suddenly surrounded by about half a dozen of the cobs, the first I had ever seen, although I had heard tell of them often enough. One of them blocked up the path, and they all began tormenting and teasing me in a way it makes me shudder to think of even now. If I had only been with you, cried father and son in a breath. The mother gave a funny little smile and went on. They had some of their horrible creatures with them too, and I must confess I was dreadfully frightened. They had torn my clothes very much, and I was afraid they were going to tear myself to pieces, when suddenly a great white soft light shone upon me. I looked up. A broad ray, like a shining road, came down from a large globe of silvery light, not very high up, indeed not quite so high as the horizon, so it could not have been a new star or another moon or anything of that sort. The cobs dropped persecuting me and looked dazed, and I thought they were going to run away, but presently they began again. The same moment, however, down the path from the globe of light came a bird, shining like silver in the sun. It gave a few rapid flaps first, and then with its wings straight out, shot, sliding down the slope of the light. It looked to me just like a white pigeon. But whatever it was, when the cobs caught sight of it coming straight down upon them, they took to their heels and scampered away across the mountain, leaving me safe, only much frightened. As soon as it had sent them off, the bird went gliding again up the light, and the moment it reached the globe the lee, GHT disappeared, just as if a shutter had been closed over a window, and I saw it no more. But I had no more trouble with the cobs that night or ever after. "How strange!" exclaimed Curdy. "Yes, it was strange, but I can't help believing it whether you do or not," said his mother. "It's exactly as your mother told it to me the very next morning," said his father. "You don't think I'm doubting my own mother," cried Curdy. "There are other people in the world quite as well worth believing as your own mother," said his mother. "I don't know that she's so much the fitter to be believed that she happens to be your mother, Mr. Curdy. There are mothers far more likely to tell lies than the little girl I saw talking to the primroses a few weeks ago. If she were to lie, I should begin to doubt my own word." "But princesses have told lies as well as other people," said Curdy. "Yes, but not princesses like that child. She's a good girl, I am certain, and that's more than being a princess. Depend upon it, you will have to be sorry for behaving so to her, Curdy. You ought at least to have held your tongue." "I am sorry now," answered Curdy. "You ought to go and tell her so then." "I don't see how I could manage that. They wouldn't let a minor boy like me have a word with her alone, and I couldn't tell her before that nurse of hers. She'd be asking ever so many questions, and I don't know how many the little princess would like me to answer. She told me that Ludi didn't know anything about her coming to get me out of the mountain. I am certain she would have prevented her somehow if she had known it. But I may have a chance before long, and meantime I must try to do something for her. I think, Father, I have got on the track at last." "Have you indeed, my boy?" said Peter. "I am sure you deserve some success. You have worked very hard for it. What have you found out?" "It's difficult, you know, Father, inside the mountain, especially in the dark, and not knowing what turns you have taken, to tell the lie of things outside." "Impossible, my boy, without a chart or at least a compass," returned his father. "Well, I think I have nearly discovered in what direction the cobs are mining. If I am right, I know something else that I can put to it, and then 1 and 1 will make 3. They very often do, Curdy, as we miners ought to be very well aware. Now tell us, my boy, what the 2 things are, and see whether we can guess at the same third as you." "I don't see what that has to do with the princess," interposed his mother. "I will soon let you see that, mother. Perhaps you may think me foolish, but until I am sure there is nothing in my present fancy, I am more determined than ever to go on with my observations. Just as we came to the channel by which we got out, I heard the miners at work somewhere near, I think down below us. Now since I began to watch them, they have mined a good half-mile in a straight line, and so far as I am aware, they are working in no other part of the mountain. But I never could tell in what direction they were going. When we came out in the king's garden, however, I thought at once whether it was possible they were working towards the king's house, and what I want to do tonight is to make sure whether they are or not. I will take a light with me." "Oh, Curdy," cried his mother, "then they will see you." "I'm no more afraid of them now than I was before," rejoined Curdy. "Now that I've got this precious shoe. They can't make another such in a hurry, and 1 bare foot will do for my purpose. Woman as she may be, I won't spare her next time. but I shall be careful with my light, for I don't want them to see me. I won't stick it in my hat." "Go on, then, and tell us what you mean to do." "I mean to take a bit of paper with me and a pencil, and go in at the mouth of the stream by which we came out. I shall mark on the paper as near as I can the angle of every turning I take until I find the cobs at work, and so get a good idea in what direction they are going. If it should prove to be nearly parallel with the stream, I shall know it is towards the king's house they are working." "And what if you should? How much wiser will you be then?" "Wait a minute, mother dear. I told you that when I came upon the royal family in the cave, they were talking of their prince, Harelip. They called him marrying a sun-woman, that means one of us, one with toes to her feet. Now in the speech, one of them made that night at their great gathering, of which I heard only a part. He said that peace would be secured for a generation at least by the pledge the prince would hold for the good behavior of her relatives. That's what he said, and he must have meant the sun-woman the prince was to marry. I am quite sure the king is much too proud to wish his son to marry any but a princess, and much too knowing to fancy that his having a peasant woman for a wife would be of any great advantage to them." "I see what you are driving at now," said his mother. "But," said his father, "our king would dig the mountain to the plain before he would have his princess the wife of a cob, if he were 10 times a prince." "Yes, but they think so much of themselves," said his mother. "Small creatures always do. The bantam is the proudest cock in my little yard." "And I fancy," said Curdie, "if they once got her, they would tell the king they would kill her except he consented to the marriage." "They might say so," said his father, "but they wouldn't kill her. They would keep her alive for the sake of the hold it gave them over our king. Whatever he did to them, they would threaten to do the same to the princess. And they are bad enough to torment her just for their own amusement. I know that," said his mother. "Anyhow, I will keep a watch on them and see what they are up to," said Curdie. "It's too horrible to think of. I daren't let myself do it, but they shan't have her, at least if I can help it. So, mother dear, my clue is all right. Will you get me a bit of paper and a pencil and a lump of peas pudding, and I will set out at once. I saw a place where I can climb over the wall of the garden quite easily." "You must mind and keep out of the way of the men on the watch," said his mother. "That I will. I don't want them to know anything about it. They would spoil it all. The cobs would only try some other plan. They are such obstinate creatures. I shall take good care, mother. They won't kill and eat me either if they should come upon me, so you needn't mind them." His mother got him what he had asked for, and Curdie set out. Close beside the door by which the princess left the garden for the mountain stood a great rock, and by climbing it Curdie got over the wall. He tied his clue to a stone just inside the channel of the stream, and took his pickaxe with him. He had not gone far before he encountered a horrid creature coming towards the mouth. The spot was too narrow for two of almost any size or shape, and besides Curdie had no wish to let the creature pass. Not being able to use his pickaxe, however, he had a severe struggle with him, and it was only after receiving many bites, some of them bad, that he succeeded in killing him with his pocket knife. Having dragged him out, he made haste to get in again before another should stop up the way. I need not follow him farther in this night's adventures. He returned to his breakfast, satisfied that the goblins were mining in the direction of the palace, on so low a level that their intention must, he thought, be to burrow under the walls of the king's house and rise up inside it, in order, he fully believed, to lay hands on the little princess and carry her off for a wife to their horrid Harelip. Chapter 24. Irene behaves like a princess. When the princess awoke from the sweetest of sleeps, she found her nurse bending over her, the housekeeper looking over the nurse's shoulder, and the laundry maid looking over the housekeeper's. The room was full of women servants, and the gentlemen at arms, with a long column of servants behind them, were peeping, or trying to peep in at the door of the nursery. "Are those horrid creatures gone?" asked the princess, remembering first what had terrified her in the morning. "You naughty, naughty little princess," cried Ludi. Her face was very pale with red streaks in it, and she looked as if she were going to shake her. But Irene said nothing, only waited to hear what should come next. "How could you get under the clothes like that and make us all fancy you were lost? And keep it up all day too? You are the most obstinate child. It's anything but fun to us, I can tell you." It was the only way the nurse could account for her disappearance. "I didn't do that, Ludi," said Irene very quietly. "Don't tell stories," cried her nurse quite rudely. "I shall tell you nothing at all," said Irene. "That's just as bad," said the nurse. "Just as bad to say nothing at all as to tell stories," exclaimed the princess. "I will ask my papa about that. He won't say so, and I don't think he will like you to say so." "Tell me directly what you mean by it," screamed the nurse, half wild with anger at the princess and fright at the possible consequences to herself. "When I tell you the truth, Ludi," said the princess, who somehow did not feel at all angry, "you say to me, 'Don't tell stories.' It seems I must tell stories before you will believe me." "You are very rude, princess," said the nurse. "You are so rude, Ludi, that I will not speak to you again till you are sorry." "Why should I, when I know you will not believe me?" returned the princess. For she did know perfectly well that if she were to tell Ludi what she had been about, the more she went on to tell her, the less would she believe her. "You are the most provoking child," cried her nurse. "You deserve to be well punished for your wicked behavior." "Please, Mrs. Housekeeper," said the princess, "will you take me to your room and keep me till my king papa comes? I will ask him to come as soon as he can." Everyone stared at these words. Up to this moment they had all regarded her as little more than a baby. But the housekeeper was afraid of the nurse and sought to patch matters up, saying, "I am sure, princess, Nursey did not mean to be rude to you. I do not think my papa would wish me to have a nurse who spoke to me as Ludi does. If she thinks I tell lies, she had better either say so to my papa or go away. Sir Walter, will you take charge of me?" "With the greatest of pleasure, princess," answered the captain of the gentlemen at arms, walking with his great stride into the room. The crowd of servants made eager way for him, and he bowed low before the little princess's bed. "I shall send my servant at once, on the fastest horse in the stable, to tell your king papa that your royal highness desires his presence. When you have chosen one of these underservants to wait upon you, I shall order the room to be cleared." "Thank you very much, Sir Walter," said the princess, and her eye glanced towards a rosy-cheeked girl who had lately come to the house as a scullery maid. But when Ludi saw the eyes of her dear princess going in search of another instead of her, she fell upon her knees by the bedside and burst into a great cry of distress. "I think, Sir Walter," said the princess, "I will keep Ludi, but I put myself under your care, and you need not trouble my king papa until I speak to you again. Will you all please to go away? I am quite safe and well, and I did not hide myself for the sake either of amusing myself or of troubling my people. Ludi, will you please to dress me?" Chapter 25. Curdie comes to grief. Everything was for some time quiet above ground. The king was still away in a distant part of his dominions. The men-at-arms kept watching about the house. They had been considerably astonished by finding at the foot of the rock in the garden the hideous body of the goblin creature killed by Curdie, but they came to the conclusion that it had been slain in the mines, and had crept out there to die, and except an occasional glimpse of a live one, they saw nothing to cause alarm. Curdie kept watching in the mountain, and the goblins kept burrowing deeper into the earth. As long as they went deeper there was, Curdie judged, no immediate danger. To Irene, the summer was as full of pleasure as ever, and for a long time, although she often thought of her grandmother during the day and often dreamed about her at night, she did not see her. The kids and the flowers were as much her delight as ever, and she made as much friendship with the miners' children she met on the mountain as Ludi would permit. But Ludi had very foolish notions concerning the dignity of a princess, not understanding that the truest princess is just the one who loves all her brothers and sisters best, and who is most able to do them good by being humble towards them. At the same time, she was considerably altered for the better in her behavior to the princess. She could not help seeing that she was no longer a mere child, but wiser than her age would account for. She kept foolishly whispering to the servants, however, sometimes that the princess was not right in her mind, sometimes that she was too good to live, and other nonsense of the same sort. All this time Curdie had to be sorry, without a chance of confessing, that he had behaved so unkindly to the princess. This perhaps made him the more diligent in his endeavors to serve her. His mother and he often talked on the subject, and she comforted him, and told him she was sure he would some day have the opportunity he so much desired. Here I should like to remark, for the sake of princes and princesses in general, that it is a low and contemptible thing to refuse to confess a fault or even an error. If a true princess has done wrong, she is always uneasy until she has had an opportunity of throwing the wrongness away from her by saying, "I did it, and I wish I had not, and I am sorry for having done it." So you see there is some ground for supposing that Curdie was not a miner only, but a prince as well. Many such instances have been known in the world's history. At length, however, he began to see signs of a change in the proceedings of the Goblin excavators. They were going no deeper, but had commenced running on a level, and he watched them, therefore, more closely than ever. All at once, one night, coming to a slope of very hard rock, they began to ascend along the inclined plane of its surface. Having reached its top, they went again on a level for a night or two, after which they began to ascend once more, and kept on at a pretty steep angle. At length Curdie judged it time to transfer his observation to another quarter, and the next night he did not go to the mine at all, but, leaving his pickaxe and clue at home, and taking only his usual lumps of bread and pea, Ass Pudding went down the mountain to the king's house. He climbed over the wall and remained in the garden the whole night, creeping on hands and knees from one spot to the other, and lying at full length with his ear to the ground, listening. But he heard nothing except the tread of the men-at-arms as they marched about, whose observation, as the night was cloudy and there was no moon, he had little difficulty in avoiding. For several following nights he continued to haunt the garden and listen, but with no success. At length, early one evening, whether it was that he had got careless of his own safety, or that the growing moon had become strong enough to expose him, his watching came to a sudden end. He was creeping from behind the rock where the stream ran out, for he had been listening all round it in the hope it might convey to his ear some indication of the whereabouts of the Goblin miners, when just as he came into the moonlight on the lawn, a whiz in his ear and a blow upon his leg startled him. He instantly squatted in the hope of eluding further notice, but when he heard the sound of running feet, he jumped up to take the chance of escape by flight. He fell, however, with a keen shoot of pain, for the bolt of a crossbow had wounded his leg, and the blood was now streaming from it. He was instantly laid hold of by 2 or 3 of the men-at-arms. It was useless to struggle, and he submitted in silence. "It's a boy," cried several of them together in a tone of amazement. "I thought it was one of those demons. What are you about here?" "Going to have a little rough usage, apparently," said Curdie, laughing, as the men shook him. "Impertinence will do you no good. You have no business here in the king's grounds, and if you don't give a true account of yourself, you shall fare as a thief." "Why, what else could he be?" said one. "He might have been after a lost kid, you know. suggested another. I see no good in trying to excuse him. He has no business here anyhow. Let me go away then, if you please, said Curdie. But we don't please, not except you give a good account of yourself. I don't feel quite sure whether I can trust you, said Curdie. We are the king's own men-at-arms, said the captain courteously, for he was taken with Curdie's appearance and courage. Well, I will tell you all about it, if you will promise to listen to me and not do anything rash. I call that cool, said one of the party, laughing. He will tell us what mischief he was about if we promise to do as pleases him. I was about no mischief, said Curdie. But ere he could say more, he turned faint and fell senseless on the grass. Then first they discovered that the bolt they had shot, taking him for one of the goblin creatures, had wounded him. They carried him into the house and laid him down in the hall. The report spread that they had caught a robber, and the servants crowded in to see the villain. Amongst the rest came the nurse. The moment she saw him, she exclaimed with indignation, I declare it's the same young rascal of a miner that was rude to me and the princess on the mountain. He actually wanted to kiss the princess. I took good care of that, the wretch. And he was prowling about, was he, just like his impudence. The princess being fast asleep, she could misrepresent at her pleasure. When he heard this, the captain, although he had considerable doubt of its truth, resolved to keep Curdie a prisoner until they could search into the affair. So after they had brought him round a little and attended to his wound, which was rather a bad one, they laid him, still exhausted from the loss of blood, upon a mattress in a disused room, one of those already so often mentioned, and locked the door and left him. He passed a troubled night, and in the morning they found him talking wildly. In the evening he came to himself, but felt very weak, and his leg was exceedingly painful. Wondering where he was, and seeing one of the men-at-arms in the room, he began to question him, and soon recalled the events of the preceding night. As he was himself unable to watch any more, he told the soldier all he knew about the goblins, and begged him to tell his companions and stir them up to watch with tenfold vigilance. But whether it was that he did not talk quite coherently, or that the whole thing appeared incredible, certainly the man concluded that Curdie was only raving still, and tried to coax him into holding his tongue. This, of course, annoyed Curdie dreadfully, who now felt in his turn what it was not to be believed, and the consequence was that his fever returned, and by the time when, at his persistent entreaties, the captain was called, there could be no doubt that he was raving. They did for him what they could and promised everything he wanted, but with no intention of fulfillment. At last he went to sleep, and when at length his sleep grew profound and peaceful, they left him, locked the door again, and withdrew, intending to revisit him early in the morning. Chapter 26. The Goblin Miners. That same night, several of the servants were having a chat together before going to bed. "What can that noise be?" said one of the housemaids, who had been listening for a moment or two. "I've heard it the last 2 nights," said the cook. "If there were any about the place, I should have taken it for rats, but my Tom keeps them far enough." "I've heard, though," said the scullery maid, "that rats move about in great companies sometimes. There may be an army of them invading us. I've heard the noises yesterday and today too." "It'll be grand fun, then, for my Tom and Mrs. Housekeeper's Bob," said the cook. "They'll be friends for once in their lives and fight on the same side. I'll engage Tom and Bob together will put to flight any number of rats." "It seems to me," said the nurse, "that the noises are much too loud for that. I have heard them all day, and my princess has asked me several times what they could be. Sometimes they sound like distant thunder, and sometimes like the noises you hear in the mountain from those horrid miners underneath." "I shouldn't wonder," said the cook, "if it was the miners after all. They may have come on some hole in the mountain through which the noises reach to us. They are always boring and blasting and breaking, you know." As he spoke, there came a great rolling rumble beneath them, and the house quivered. They all started up in a fright, and rushing to the hall found the gentle men-at-arms in consternation also. They had sent to wake their captain, who said from their description that it must have been an earthquake, an occurrence which, although very rare in that country, had taken place almost within the century, and then went to bed again, strange to say, and fell fast asleep without once thinking of Curdie, or associating the noises they had heard with what he had told them. He had not believed Curdie. If he had, he would at once have thought of what he had said, and would have taken precautions. As they heard nothing more, they concluded that Sir Walter was right, and that the danger was over for perhaps another 100 years. The fact, as discovered afterwards, was that the goblins had, in working up a second sloping face of stone, arrived at a huge block which lay under the cellars of the house, within the line of the foundations. It was so round that when they succeeded, after hard work, in dislodging it without blasting, it rolled thundering down the slope with a bounding, jarring roll, which shook the foundations of the house. The goblins were themselves dismayed at the noise, for they knew, by careful spying and measuring, that they must now be very near, if not under the king's house, and they feared giving an alarm. They, therefore, remained quiet for a while, and when they began to work again, they no doubt thought themselves very fortunate in coming upon a vein of sand which filled a winding fissure in the rock on which the house was built. By scooping this away, they came out in the king's wine cellar. No sooner did they find where they were than they scurried back again, like rats into their holes, and running at full speed to the Goblin Palace, announced their success to the king and queen with shouts of triumph. In a moment the Goblin royal family and the whole Goblin people were on their way in hot haste to the king's house, each eager to have a share in the glory of carrying off that same night the Princess Irene. The queen went stumping along in one shoe of stone and one of skin. This could not have been pleasant, and my readers may wonder that, with such skillful workmen about her, she had not yet replaced the shoe carried off by Curdie. As the king, however, had more than one ground of objection to her stone shoes, he no doubt took advantage of the discovery of her toes, and threatened to expose her deformity if she had another made. I presume he insisted on her being content with skin shoes, and allowed her to wear the remaining granite one on the present occasion only because she was going out to war. They soon arrived in the king's wine cellar, and regardless of its huge vessels, of which they did not know the use, proceeded at once, but as quietly as they could, to force the door that led upwards. Chapter 27. The Goblins in the King's House. When Curdie fell asleep, he began at once to dream. He thought he was ascending the mountainside from the mouth of the mine, whistling and singing ring, dod, bang, when he came upon a woman and child who had lost their way, and from that point he went on dreaming everything that had happened to him since he thus met the princess and Ludi, how he had watched the goblins, how he had been taken by them, how he had been rescued by the princess. Everything, indeed, until he was wounded, captured, and imprisoned by the men-at-arms. And now he thought he was lying wide awake where they had laid him, when suddenly he heard a great thundering sound. "The cobs are coming," he said. "They didn't believe a word I told them. The cobs'll be carrying off the princess from under their stupid noses, but they shan't, that they shan't." He jumped up as he thought and began to dress, but to his dismay found that he was still lying in bed. "Now then I will," he said. "Here goes, I am up now." But yet again he found himself snug in bed. 20 times he tried, and 20 times he failed, for in fact he was not awake, only dreaming that he was. At length, in an agony of despair, fancying he heard the goblins all over the house, He gave a great cry. Then there came, as he thought, a hand upon the lock of his door. It opened, and looking up, he saw a lady with white hair, carrying a silver box in her hand, enter the room. She came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelt like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave of her hands, everything vanished. He felt himself sinking into the profoundest slumber, and remembered nothing more until he awoke in earnest. The setting moon was throwing a feeble light through the casement, and the house was full of uproar. There was soft, heavy, multitudinous stamping, a clashing and clanging of weapons, the voices of men and the cries of women, mixed with a hideous bellowing which sounded victorious. The Cobbs were in the house. He sprang from his bed, hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. Then, spying an old hunting knife or short sword hanging on the wall, he caught it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sounds of strife, which grew louder and louder. When he reached the ground floor, he found the whole place swarming. All the goblins of the mountain seemed gathered there. He rushed amongst them, shouting, 1, 2, hit and hew, 3, 4, blast and bore. And with every rhyme he came down a great stamp upon a foot, cutting at the same time their faces, executing, indeed, a sword dance of the wildest description. Away scattered the goblins in every direction, into closets, upstairs, into chimneys, up on rafters, and down to the cellars. Curdie went on stamping and slashing and singing, but saw nothing of the people of the house until he came to the great hall, in which, the moment he entered it, arose a great goblin shout. The last of the men-at-arms, the captain himself, was on the floor, buried beneath a wallowing crowd of goblins. For, while each knight was busy defending himself as well as he could, by stabs in the thick bodies of the goblins, for he had soon found their heads all but invulnerable, the queen had attacked his legs and feet with her horrible granite shoe, and he was soon down. But the captain had got his back to the wall and stood out longer. The goblins would have torn them all to pieces, but the king had given orders to carry them away alive, and over each of them, in 12 groups, was standing a knot of goblins, while as many as could find room were sitting upon their prostrate bodies. Curdie burst in dancing and gyrating and stamping and singing like a small incarnate whirlwind. Where 'tis all a hole, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no soles? But she upon her foot, sir, has a granite shoe, the strongest leather boot, sir. 6 would soon be through. The queen gave a howl of rage and dismay, and before she recovered her presence of mind, Curdie, having begun with the group nearest him, had 11 of the knights on their legs again. Stamp on their feet, he cried as each man rose, and in a few minutes the hall was nearly empty, the goblins running from it as fast as they could, howling and shrieking and limping, and cowering every now and then as they ran to cuddle their wounded feet in their hard hands, or to protect them from the frightful stamp of the armed men. And now Curdie approached the group which, entrusting in the queen and her shoe, kept their guard over the prostrate captain. The king sat on the captain's head, but the queen stood in front, like an infuriated cat, with her perpendicular eyes gleaming green and her hair standing half up from her horrid head. Her heart was quaking, however, and she kept moving about her skin-shod foot with nervous apprehension. When Curdie was within a few paces, she rushed at him, made one tremendous stamp at his opposing foot, which happily he withdrew in time and caught him round the waist, to dash him on the marble floor. But just as she caught him, he came down with all the weight of his iron-shod shoe upon her skin-shod foot, and with a hideous howl she dropped him, squatted on the floor, and took her foot in both her hands. Meanwhile, the rest rushed on the king and the bodyguard, sent them flying, and lifted the prostrate captain, who was all but pressed to death. It was some moments before he recovered breath and consciousness. "Where's the princess?" cried Curdie again and again. No one knew, and off they all rushed in search of her. Through every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she to be found. Neither was one of the servants to be seen. But Curdie, who had kept to the lower part of the house, which was now quiet enough, began to hear a confused sound as of a distant hubbub, and set out to find where it came from. The noise grew as his sharp ears guided him to a stair and so to the wine cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip with another company had gone off to search the house. They captured everyone they met, and when they could find no more, they hurried away to carry them safe to the caverns below. But when the butler, who was amongst them, found that their path lay through the wine cellar, he bethought himself of persuading them to taste the wine, and as he had hoped, they no sooner tasted than they wanted more. The rooted goblins on their way below joined them, and when Curdie entered they were all, with outstretched hands, in which were vessels of every description from saucepan to silver cup, pressing around the butler, who sat at the tap of a huge cask, filling and filling. Curdie cast one glance around the place before commencing his attack, and saw in the farthest corner a terrified group of the domestics unwatched, but cowering without courage to attempt their escape. Amongst them was the terror-stricken face of Ludi, but nowhere could he see the princess. Seized with the horrible conviction that Harelip had already carried her off, he rushed amongst them, unable for wrath to sing any more, but stamping and cutting with greater fury than ever. "Stamp on their feet! Stamp on their feet!" he shouted, and in a moment the goblins were disappearing through the hole in the floor like rats and mice. They could not vanish so fast, however, but that many more goblin feet had to go limping back over the underground ways of the mountain that morning. Presently, however, they were reinforced from above by the king and his party, with the redoubtable queen at their head. Finding Curdie again busy amongst her unfortunate subjects, she rushed at him once more with the rage of despair, and this time gave him a bad bruise on the foot. Then a regular stamping fight got up between them, Curdie, with the point of his hunting knife, keeping her from clasping her mighty arms about him, as he watched his opportunity of getting once more a good stamp at her skin-shod foot. But the queen was more wary as well as more agile than hitherto. The rest, meantime, finding their adversary thus matched for the moment, paused in their headlong hurry and turned to the shivering group of women in the corner. As if determined to emulate his father and have a son-woman of some sort to share his future throne, Harelip rushed at them, caught up Ludi, and sped with her to the hole. She gave a great shriek, and Curdie heard her and saw the plight she was in. Gathering all his strength, he gave the queen a sudden cut across the face with his weapon, came down as she started back, with all his weight on the proper foot, and sprung to Ludi's rescue. The prince had 2 defenseless feet, and on both of them Curdie stamped just as he reached the hole. He dropped his burden and rolled, shrieking, into the earth. Curdie made one stab at him as he disappeared, caught hold of the senseless Ludi, and having dragged her back to the corner, there mounted guard over her, preparing once more to encounter the queen. Her face streaming with blood and her eyes flashing green lightning through it, she came on with her mouth open and her teeth grinning like a tiger's, followed by the king and her bodyguard of the thickest goblins. But the same moment in rushed the captain and his men and ran at them, stamping furiously. They dared not encounter such an onset. Away they scurried, the queen foremost. Of course, the right thing would have been to take the king and queen prisoners, and hold them hostages for the princess. but they were so anxious to find her that no one thought of detaining them until it was too late. Having thus rescued the servants, they set about searching the house once more. None of them could give the least information concerning the princess. Ludi was almost silly with terror, and although scarcely able to walk, would not leave Curdy's side for a single moment. Again, he allowed the others to search the rest of the house, where, except a dismayed goblin lurking here and there, they found no one, while he requested Ludi to take him to the princess's room. She was as submissive and obedient as if he had been the king. He found the bedclothes tossed about, and most of them on the floor, while the princess's garments were scattered all over the room, which was in the readest confusion. It was only too evident that the goblins had been there, and Curdy had no longer any doubt that she had been carried off at the very first of the inroad. With a pang of despair, he saw how wrong they had been in not securing the king and queen and prince, but he determined to find and rescue the princess as she had found and rescued him, or meet the worst fate to which the goblins could doom him. Chapter 28. Curdy's Guide. Just as the consolation of this resolve dawned upon his mind and he was turning away for the cellar to follow the goblins into their hole, something touched his hand. It was the slightest touch, and when he looked he could see nothing. Feeling and peering about in the gray of the dawn, his fingers came upon a tight thread. He looked again, and narrowly, but still could see nothing. It flashed upon him that this must be the princess's thread. Without saying a word, for he knew no one would believe him any more than he had believed the princess, he followed the thread with his finger, contrived to give Ludi the slip, and was soon out of the house and on the mountainside, surprised that, if the thread were indeed the grandmother's messenger, it should have led the princess, as he supposed it must, into the mountain, where she would be certain to meet the goblins rushing back enraged from their defeat. But he hurried on in the hope of overtaking her first. When he arrived, however, at the place where the path turned off for the mine, he found that the thread did not turn with it, but went straight up the mountain. Could it be that the thread was leading him home to his mother's cottage? Could the princess be there? He bounded up the mountain like one of its own goats, and before the sun was up the thread had brought him indeed to his mother's door. There it vanished from his fingers, and he could not find it, search as he might. The door was on the latch, and he entered. There sat his mother by the fire, and in her arms lay the princess, fast asleep. "Hush, Curdy," said his mother. "Do not wake her. I'm so glad you're come. I thought the cobs must have got you again." With a heart full of delight, Curdy sat down at a corner of the hearth, on a stool opposite his mother's chair, and gazed at the princess, who slept as peacefully as if she had been in her own bed. All at once she opened her eyes and fixed them on him. "Oh, Curdy, you're come," she said quietly. "I thought you would." Curdy rose and stood before her with downcast eyes. "Irene," he said, "I am very sorry I did not believe you." "Oh, never mind, Curdy," answered the princess. "You couldn't, you know. You do believe me now, don't you?" "I can't help it now. I ought to have helped it before." "Why can't you help it now?" "Because, just as I was going into the mountain to look for you, I got hold of your thread, and it brought me here." "Then you've come from my house, have you?" "Yes, I have." "I didn't know you were there." "I've been there 2 or 3 days, I believe." "And I never knew it. Then perhaps you can tell me why my grandmother has brought me here. I can't think. Something woke me. I didn't know what, but I was frightened, and I felt for the thread, and there it was. I was more frightened still when it brought me out on the mountain, for I thought it was going to take me into it again, and I liked the outside of it best. I supposed you were in trouble again, and I had to get you out. But it brought me here instead, and oh, Curdy, your mother has been so kind to me, just like my own grandmother." Here Curdy's mother gave the princess a hug, and the princess turned and gave her a sweet smile, and held up her mouth to kiss her. "Then you didn't see the cobs, asked Curdy. No, I haven't been into the mountain, I told you, Curdy. But the cobs have been into your house, all over it, and into your bedroom making such a row. What did they want there? It was very rude of them. They wanted you, to carry you off into the mountain with them, for a wife to their Prince Harelip. Oh, how dreadful, cried the princess, shuddering. But you needn't be afraid, you know. Your grandmother takes care of you. Ah, you do believe in my grandmother, then. I'm so glad. She made me think you would someday. All at once Curdy remembered his dream, and was silent, thinking. But how did you come to be in my house, and me not know it? Asked the princess. Then Curdy had to explain everything. How he had watched for her sake. How he had been wounded and shut up by the soldiers. How he heard the noises and could not rise, and how the beautiful old lady had come to him, and all that followed. Poor Curdy, to lie there hurt and ill and me never to know it, exclaimed the princess, stroking his rough hand. I would have come and nursed you if they had told me. I didn't see you were lame, said his mother. Am I, mother? Oh yes, I suppose I ought to be. I declare I've never thought of it since I got up to go down. In amongst the cobs. Let me see the wound, said his mother. He pulled down his stocking, when behold, except a great scar, his leg was perfectly sound. Curdy and his mother gazed in each other's eyes, full of wonder, but Irene called out. I thought so, Curdy. I was sure it wasn't a dream. I was sure my grandmother had been to see you. Don't you smell the roses? It was my grandmother healed your leg and sent you to help me. No, Princess Irene, said Curdy. I wasn't good enough to be allowed to help you. I didn't believe you. Your grandmother took care of you without me. She sent you to help my people anyhow. I wish my King Papa would come. I do want so to tell him how good you have been. But, said the mother, we are forgetting how frightened your people must be. You must take the princess home at once, Curdy, or at least go and tell them where she is. Yes, mother, only I'm dreadfully hungry. Do let me have some breakfast first. They ought to have listened to me, and then they wouldn't have been taken by surprise as they were. That is true, Curdy, but it is not for you to blame them much. You remember. Yes, mother, I do. Only I must really have something to eat. You shall, my boy, as fast as I can get it, said his mother, rising and setting the princess on her chair. But before his breakfast was ready, Curdy jumped up so suddenly as to startle both his companions. Mother, mother, he cried, I was forgetting. You must take the princess home yourself. I must go and wake my father. Without a word of explanation, he rushed to the place where his father was sleeping. Having thoroughly roused him with what he told him, he darted out of the cottage. Chapter 29. Mason Work. He had all at once remembered the resolution of the goblins to carry out their second plan upon the failure of the first. No doubt they were already busy, and the mine was therefore in the greatest danger of being flooded and rendered useless, not to speak of the lives of the miners. When he reached the mouth of the mine, after rousing all the miners within reach, he found his father and a good many more just entering. They all hurried to the gang by which he had found a way into the Goblin country. There the foresight of Peter had already collected a great many blocks of stone, with cement, ready for building up the weak place, well enough known to the goblins. Although there was not room for more than two to be actually building at once, they managed, by setting all the rest to work in preparing the cement and passing the stones, to finish in the course of the day a huge buttress filling the whole gang, and supported everywhere by the live rock. Before the hour when they usually dropped work, they were satisfied the mine was secure. They had heard goblin hammers and pickaxes busy all the time, and at length fancied they heard sounds of water they had never heard before. But that was otherwise accounted for when they left the mine, for they stepped out into a tremendous storm which was raging all over the mountain. The thunder was bellowing, and the lightning lancing out of a huge black cloud which lay above it and hung down its edges of thick mist over its sides. The lightning was breaking out of the mountain too, and flashing up into the cloud. From the state of the brooks, now swollen into raging torrents, it was evident that the storm had been storming all day. The wind was blowing as if it would blow him off the mountain, but, anxious about his mother and the princess, Curdie darted up through the thick of the tempest. Even if they had not set out before the storm came on, he did not judge them safe, for in such a storm even their poor little house was in danger. Indeed, he soon found that but for a huge rock against which it was built, and which protected it both from the blasts and the waters, it must have been swept if it was not blown away. For the two torrents into which this rock parted, the rush of water behind it united again in front of the cottage, two roaring and dangerous streams, which his mother and the princess could not possibly have passed. It was with great difficulty that he forced his way through one of them and up to the door. The moment his hand fell on the latch, through all the uproar of winds and waters came the joyous cry of the princess. "There's Curdie, Curdie, Curdie." She was sitting wrapped in blankets on the bed, his mother trying for the 100th time to light the fire which had been drowned by the rain that came down the chimney. The clay floor was one mass of mud, and the whole place looked wretched. But the faces of the mother and the princess shone as if their troubles only made them the merrier. Curdie burst out laughing at the sight of them. "I never had such fun," said the princess, her eyes twinkling and her pretty teeth shining. "How nice it must be to live in a cottage on the mountain." "It all depends on what kind your inside house is," said the mother. "I know what you mean." "And," said Irene, "that's the kind of thing my grandmother says." By the time Peter returned, the storm was nearly over, but the streams were so fierce and so swollen that it was not only out of the question for the princess to go down the mountain, but most dangerous for Peter, even or Curdie, to make the attempt in the gathering darkness. "They will be dreadfully frightened about you," said Peter to the princess, "but we cannot help it. We must wait till the morning." With Curdie's help, the fire was lighted at last, and the mother set about making their supper. And after supper they all told the princess stories till she grew sleepy. Then Curdie's mother laid her in Curdie's bed, which was in a tiny little garret room. As soon as she was in bed, through a little window low down in the roof she caught sight of her grandmother's lamp shining far away beneath, and she gazed at the beautiful silvery globe until she fell asleep. Chapter 30. The King and the Kiss. The next morning the sun rose so bright that Irene said the rain had washed his face and let the light out clean. The torrents were still roaring down the side of the mountain, but they were so much smaller as not to be dangerous in the daylight. After an early breakfast, Peter went to his work and Curdie and his mother set out to take the princess home. They had difficulty in getting her dry across the streams, and Curdie had again and again to carry her. But at last they got safe on the broader part of the road and walked gently down towards the king's house. And what should they see as they turned the last corner but the last of the king's troop riding through the gate? "Oh, Curdie," cried Irene, clapping her hands right joyfully, "my King Papa is come." The moment Curdie heard that, he caught her up in his arms and set off at full speed, crying, "Come on, mother dear. The king may break his heart before he knows that she is safe." Irene clung round his neck and he ran with her like a deer. When he entered the gate into the court, there sat the king on his horse, with all the people of the house about him, weeping and hanging their heads. The king was not weeping, but his face was white as a dead man's, and he looked as if the life had gone out of him. The men-at-arms he had brought with him sat with horror-stricken faces, but eyes flashing with rage, waiting only for the word of the king to do something. They did not know what, and nobody knew what. The day before, The men-at-arms belonging to the house, as soon as they were satisfied the princess had been carried away, rushed after the goblins into the hole, but found that they had already so skillfully blockaded the narrowest part, not many feet below the cellar, that without miners and their tools they could do nothing. Not one of them knew where the mouth of the mine lay, and some of those who had set out to find it had been overtaken by the storm and had not even yet returned. Poor Sir Walter was especially filled with shame, and almost hoped the king would order his head to be cut off, for to think of that sweet little face down amongst the goblins was unendurable. When Curdie ran in at the gate with the princess in his arms, they were all so absorbed in their own misery and awed by the king's presence and grief that no one observed his arrival. He went straight up to the king, where he sat on his horse. "Papa, Papa," the princess cried, stretching out her arms to him, "here I am." The king started. The color rushed to his face. He gave an inarticulate cry. Curdie held up the princess, and the king bent down and took her from his arms. As he clasped her to his bosom, the big tears went dropping down his cheeks and his beard, and such a shout arose from all the bystanders that the startled horses pranced and capered, and the armor rang and clattered, and the rocks of the mountain echoed back the noises. The princess greeted them all as she nestled in her father's bosom, and the king did not set her down until she had told them all the story. But she had more to tell about Curdie than about herself, and what she did tell about herself none of them could understand, except the king and Curdie, who stood by the king's knee stroking the neck of the great white horse. And still as she told what Curdie had done, Sir Walter and others added to what she told, even Ludi joining in the praises of his courage and energy. Curdie held his peace, looking quietly up in the king's face, and his mother stood on the outskirts of the crowd listening with delight, for her son's deeds were pleasant in her ears until the princess caught sight of her. "And there is his mother, King Papa," she said. "See, there, she is such a nice mother and has been so kind to me." They all parted asunder as the king made a sign to her to come forward. She obeyed, and he gave her his hand but could not speak. "And now, King Papa," the princess went on, "I must tell you another thing. One night long ago Curdie drove the goblins away and brought Ludi and me safe from the mountain, and I promised him a kiss when we got home, but Ludi wouldn't let me give it him. I don't want you to scold Ludi, but I want you to tell her that a princess must do as she promises." "Indeed she must, my child, except it be wrong," said the king. "There, give Curdie a kiss." And as he spoke, he held her towards him. The princess reached down, threw her arms round Curdie's neck and kissed him on the mouth, saying, "There, Curdie, there's the kiss I promised you." Then they all went into the house, and the cook rushed to the kitchen and the servants to their work. Ludi dressed Irene in her shiningest clothes, and the king put off his armor and put on purple and gold, and a messenger was sent for Peter and all the miners, and there was a great and a grand feast, which continued long after the princess was put to bed. Chapter 31. The Subterranean Waters. The king's harper, who always formed a part of his escort, was chanting a ballad which he made as he went on playing on his instrument, about the princess and the goblins, and the prowess of Curdie, when all at once he ceased, with his eyes on one of the doors of the hall. Thereupon the eyes of the king and his guests turned thitherward also. The next moment, through the open doorway came the Princess Irene. She went straight up to her father, with her right hand stretched out a little sideways, and her forefinger, as her father and Curdie understood, feeling its way along the invisible thread. The king took her on his knee, and she said in his ear, "King Papa, do you hear that noise?" "I hear nothing," said the king. "Listen," she said, holding up her forefinger. The king listened, and a great stillness fell upon the company. Each man, seeing that the king listened also, and the harper sat with his harp between his arms and his finger silent upon the strings. "I do hear a noise," said the king at length, "a noise as of distant thunder. It is coming nearer and nearer. What can it be?" They all heard it now, and each seemed ready to start to his feet as he listened. Yet all sat perfectly still. The noise came rapidly nearer. "What can it be?" said the king again. "I think it must be another storm coming over the mountain," said Sir Walter. Then Curdie, who at the first word of the king had slipped from his seat and laid his ear to the ground, rose up quickly, and approaching the king said, speaking very fast, "Please, your majesty, I think I know what it is. I have no time to explain, for that might make it too late for some of us. Will your majesty give orders that everybody leave the house as quickly as possible and get up the mountain?" The king, who was the wisest man in the kingdom, knew well there was a time when things must be done and questions left till afterwards. He had faith in Curdie and rose instantly, with Irene in his arms. "Every man and woman follow me," he said, and strode out into the darkness. Before he had reached the gate, the noise had grown to a great thundering roar, and the ground trembled beneath their feet, and before the last of them had crossed the court, out after them from the great hall door came a huge rush of turbid water, and almost swept them away. But they got safe out of the gate and up the mountain, while the torrent went roaring down the road into the valley beneath. Curdie had left the king and the princess to look after his mother, whom he and his father, one on each side, caught up when the stream overtook them and carried safe and dry. When the king had got out of the way of the water, a little up the mountain, he stood with the princess in his arms, looking back with amazement on the issuing torrent, which glimmered fierce and foamy through the night. There Curdie rejoined them. "Now, Curdie," said the king, "what does it mean? Is this what you expected?" "It is, your majesty," said Curdie, and proceeded to tell him about the second scheme of the goblins, who, fancying the miners of more importance to the upper world than they were, had resolved, if they should fail in carrying off the king's daughter, to flood the mine and drown the miners. Then he explained what the miners had done to prevent it. The goblins had, in pursuance of their design, let loose all the underground reservoirs and streams, expecting the water to run down into the mine, which was lower than their part of the mountain, for they had, as they supposed, not knowing of the solid wall close behind, broken a passage through into it. But the readiest outlet the water could find had turned out to be the tunnel they had made to the king's house, the possibility of which catastrophe had not occurred to the young miner until he had laid his ear to the floor of the hall. What was then to be done? The house appeared in danger of falling, and every moment the torrent was increasing. "We must set out at once," said the king, "but how to get at the horses? Shall I see if we can manage?" "That," said Curdie. "Do," said the king. Curdie gathered the men-at-arms and took them over the garden wall and so to the stables. They found their horses in terror. The water was rising fast around them, and it was quite time they were got out. But there was no way to get them out, except by riding them through the stream, which was now pouring from the lower windows as well as the door. As one horse was quite enough for any man to manage through such a torrent, Curdie got on the king's white charger, and, leading the way, brought them all in safety to the rising ground. "Look, look, Curdie," cried Irene, the moment that, having dismounted, he led the horse up to the king. Curdie did look, and saw, high in the air, somewhere about the top of the king's house, a great globe of light shining like the purest silver. "Oh," he cried in some consternation, "that is your grandmother's lamp. We must get her out. I will go and find her. The house may fall, you know." "My grandmother is in no danger," said Irene, smiling. "Here, Curdie, "Take the princess while I get on my horse," said the king. Curdie took the princess again, and both turned their eyes to the globe of light. The same moment there shot from it a white bird, which, descending with outstretched wings, made one circle round the king and Curdie and the princess, and then glided up again. The light and the pigeon vanished together. "Now, Curdie," said the princess, as he lifted her to her father's arms, "you see my grandmother knows all about it and isn't frightened. I believe she could walk through that water and it wouldn't wet her a bit." "But my child," said the king, "you will be cold if you haven't something more on. Run, Curdie, my boy, and fetch anything you can lay your hands on to keep the princess warm. We have a long ride before us." Curdie was gone in a moment and soon returned with a great rich fur and the news that dead goblins were tossing about in the current through the house. They had been caught in their own snare. Instead of the mine, they had flooded their own country, whence they were now swept up drowned. Irene shuddered, but the king held her close to his bosom. Then he turned to Sir Walter and said, "Bring Curdie's father and mother here." "I wish," said the king when they stood before him, "to take your son with me. He shall enter my bodyguard at once and wait further promotion." Peter and his wife, overcome, only murmured almost inaudible thanks, but Curdie spoke aloud. "Please, your majesty," he said, "I cannot leave my father and mother." "That's right, Curdie," cried the princess. "I wouldn't if I was you." The king looked at the princess, and then at Curdie with a glow of satisfaction on his countenance. "I too think you are right, Curdie," he said, "and I will not ask you again, but I shall have a chance of doing something for you some time." "Your majesty has already allowed me to serve you," said Curdie. "But Curdie," said his mother, "why shouldn't you go with the king? We can get on very well without you." "But I can't get on very well without you," said Curdie. "The king is very kind, but I could not be half the use to him that I am to you. Please, your majesty, if you wouldn't mind giving my mother a red petticoat. I should have got her one long ago, but for the goblins." "As soon as we get home," said the king, "Irene and I will search out the warmest one to be found and send it by one of the gentlemen." "Yes, that we will, Curdie," said the princess. "And next summer we'll come back and see you wear it, Curdie's mother," she added. "Shan't we, King Papa?" "Yes, my love, I hope so," said the king. Then turning to the miners, he said, "Will you do the best you can for my servants tonight? I hope they will be able to return to the house tomorrow." The miners with one voice promised their hospitality. Then the king commanded his servants to mind whatever Curdie should say to them, and after shaking hands with him and his father and mother, the king and the princess and all their company rode away down the side of the new stream, which had already devoured half the road, into the starry night. Chapter 32. The last chapter. All the rest went up the mountain and separated in groups to the homes of the miners. Curdie and his father and mother took Ludi with them, and the whole way a light, of which all but Ludi understood the origin, shone upon their path. But when they looked round, they could see nothing of the silvery globe. For days and days, the water continued to rush from the doors and windows of the king's house, and a few goblin bodies were swept out into the road. Curdie saw that something must be done. He spoke to his father and the rest of the miners, and they at once proceeded to make another outlet for the waters. By setting all hands to the work, tunneling here and building there, they soon succeeded, and having also made a little tunnel to drain the water away from under the king's house, they were soon able to get into the wine cellar, where they found a multitude of dead goblins, among the rest the queen, with the skin shoe gone and the stone one fast to her ankle, for the water had swept away the barricade, which prevented the men-at-arms from following the goblins, and had greatly widened the passage. They built it securely up, and then went back to their labors in the mine. A good many of the goblins with their creatures escaped from the inundation out upon the mountain, but most of them soon left that part of the country, and most of those who remained grew milder in character, and indeed became very much like the Scotch brownies. Their skulls became softer as well as their hearts, and their feet grew harder, and by degrees they became friendly with the inhabitants of the mountain and even with the miners. But the latter were merciless to any of the cob's creatures that came in their way, until at length they all but disappeared. The rest of the history of the princess and Curdie must be kept for another volume.